back to Remember. Today's video, we got one of the best rivalries in all of Warhammer 40k. We got the Imperial Fist versus the Iron Warriors. Now, before we get into the video, don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, because the support goes a long way. Now, let's get into the video.
Hydra Cordatus remembered when it had been green. Before the Brother War scorched the sky and turned the long plains to dust, there had been forests on the lower slopes, dark and resinous. Rivers had run clear and quick, bright as wire under the sun. Crops had swayed in ordered ranks, and foundries had breathed only thin plumes into a pale, honest sky. The planet had been a loyal jewel in the Sentinel worlds, a forge that hammered out the engines of Imperial conquest. The Cadmean citadel sat above all of it, like a nail driven through the mountain's skull. From orbit, it was a knot of geometry, irregular to the eye, but mathematically perfect. Every angle calculated for overlapping fire, every face an interlocking plane of bastions and curtain walls, towers and galleries. No outer glacis of rockcrete, no neat lines of trench and ditch. The citadel grew straight from the mountain itself, a carapace extruded from the world's stone. Only it was not stone. Under boot, it had a give to it that no rock should possess. It did not crumble when chipped. It flowed. The walls were formed from some ancient mineral machine, a silicate flesh that glimmered faintly gold and slate grey in the light and shifted with the slow inevitability of glaciers. It was older than the Imperium, older than the Mechanicum, a relic of some prior age that had not survived to name it. The Adepts had a designation for it, some sequence of letters and numbers that looked correct in archive columns. None of them used it. Among themselves, in hissing binaric that tasted of static and incense, they called it a living weapon. The fortress proved that nature on the day of compliance. Imperial army armor had ground up the lower switchbacks to the sound of drums and the crack of distant artillery. Standard pattern tanks, their flanks still marked by the sigils of the expeditionary fleet, had rolled to a halt under the shadow of the walls. Their guns were cold, their crews standing to attention on the hulls. The compliance edict had already been signed. The world had bent the knee. The show was for the records and the remembrances, for the vox pics that would be sent back to Terra, to become part of the great tapestry of the Crusade. The Mechanicum had brought a different show. A captured macro hauler, stripped to its bones, had been loaded with sterile servitors in ragged grey overalls. They shuffled and twitched where they had been shackled to its deck, sightless eye lenses staring, tongues long since excised. A single Cybernetica controller stood in the hauler's prow, brass-threaded staff in its hands, mechadendrites curling like snakes around its hunched shoulders. The order came. Bolter and Lasfire, deliberately low-powered, smashed into the citadel's outer face for the span of a few breaths. White scars crawled across the mineral skin, lines of forced fracture radiating from each impact. The servitors were herded forward, stumbling across the loose scree at the mountain's base, climbing the first steep incline in a clatter of chains and heavy feet. The citadel replied. Spines pushed outward from the wall, long grey thorns erupting from the smooth face of the fortress with obscene organic force. They grew in heartbeats, razor ridges of stone lancing into the clusters of climbing bodies. Servitors were punched through the chest, ripped from the rock by metre-long stakes that burst from the mountainside. Some were pinned in place like pinned insects, arms and legs shuddering as their dead flesh juddered on the impaling spikes. Others vanished entirely as the wall opened beneath them. One moment there were gaps and crevices, offering cover and purchase. The next, there were mouths in the stone, black voids that swallowed whole bodies, then sealed shut again. Limbs and torsos were cut through as cleanly as if some god had wielded a guillotine through the mountain. The walls grew smooth once more, leaving no sign there had ever been men there. No blood seeped from the stone. The dead were simply subsumed, converted into structural reinforcement. Watching from the battlements, the tech priests had murmured to one another, in modulated, awed binaric, sparks crawling along their cranial plugs. To every eye in that gathered host, from the lowliest guardsman to the most exalted magos, it had seemed as though the fortress had taken a breath. Rogel Dorn had not spoken immediately. The Primarch of the 7th Legion stood with his gauntleted hands resting on the stone rampart. The wind tugged faintly at the crimson tabard hanging from his golden armor. His face, carved from pale marble and old scars, was turned out over the valley. He did not look at the impaled and vanished servitors, did not glance down at the liquid stone that already began to smooth and knit across the fresh impacts. He studied fields and foundries, road nets and rail lines, the positions of manufactoria and silos and hab clusters. He measured in silence. Only when the last of the servitors stopped twitching did he speak. "This will serve," he said. The words were for the officers and adepts gathered around him, rather than the Mechanicum alone. Endric Cadmus, still no more than a civic functionary drawn from the planet's own bureaucracy, felt them settle on his shoulders like a mantle of iron. "You have your governor," Dorn went on. "He is of your own people. Remember that. He will be obeyed as my proxy." It was as close to generosity as the 7th Legion ever came. Let the people choose one of their own respected leaders, someone whose name already carried weight in the forges and habs. Let the new order's face be familiar, even if the hand holding the leash was not. Cadmus bowed his head to the Primarch, throat dry, heart hammering painfully in his chest. He knew full well that his selection had not been free choice. The Imperial fists had observed, investigated, tested. They had taken the names of popular agitators and quiet organizers, of factory chiefs and militia commanders, and then Dorn had simply pointed. "You." It was more terrifying than any ballot. Behind the governor, a figure in yellow plate stepped forward and knelt. His armor was scarred but well kept, its heraldry precise. A fist of black on his shoulder, denoting the 42nd Company, set him apart from the others gathered under the banner of the 7th. "Felix Cassander," Dorn said. "Captain, 42nd. Casteld Garrison Commander of the Cadmean Citadel. You will hold this fortress and ensure ordered governance on this world." "Yes, Lord." Cassander's voice was deep, controlled. His helm was clipped to his belt, exposing a face that could have been carved from the same stone as the citadel. Old impact scars marred his cheek and jaw, a stippled map of campaigns stretching back to the earliest years of the Crusade. "You will leave 200 of your brothers," Dorn continued. "You will draw upon the Mechanicum and the Imperial army for labor and arms. You will see that this world pays its tithe. You will maintain the citadel in a state of constant readiness. You will consider yourself already dead." Cassander did not flinch. "Yes, Lord." Dorn's pale eyes turned back to the valley. "When the summons comes, you will answer it," he said. "Until then, this mountain is your body, and these guns are your hands. No enemy may take this fortress while a fist of the 7th yet draws breath upon its walls. Understand this, Captain. The citadel will be a symbol to our brothers, to our enemies, to the galaxy." Cassander bowed his head, accepting the weight as he had accepted armor and gene seed before it. "I understand." Years passed, measured in forge quotas and drill cycles rather than calendar marks. Hydra Cordatus shifted under the regime of ordered governance. The forest receded as more ground was given over to extraction sites and manufactoria. The rivers grew thicker with the runoff of industry. Dust storms became more common, scouring the plains and turning the daylight a deep, unsettled orange. The atmosphere tasted of oil and metal, and the sky was rarely free of smoke. The Cadmean Citadel watched, altering itself in slow ways, opening new galleries, sealing old ones. The Mechanicum crept through its bowels like cautious parasites, tapping into conduits, mapping and marking with auspexes that never quite explained what they saw. The fortress tolerated them, perhaps, or simply did not regard their probing as a threat worth responding to. Cassander learned the rhythm of his command. Imperial army regiments rotated through the valley, relics of earlier compliance actions now permanently attached to the world's defense. Solar Auxilia Grenadiers drilled in the shadows of the walls, their bronze armor gleaming, their discipline a pleasing echo of Legion standards. The Mechanicum fielded maniples of Castellax and Thalax, automata whose footfalls shook the parade grounds and whose weapons could scour entire ranks of flesh in a blink. Grain barges came and went, then were replaced by ore transports, then by tankers full of promethium and processed chem. The captain of the 42nd Company moved through it all, yellow armor, a constant in a shifting sea of uniforms and sigils. He walked the battlements at dawn and at dusk. He shared no jokes with the men he commanded. He did not fraternize with Cadmus beyond what duty required. He was an Imperial fist. His brothers took their tone from him. When the recall orders came, they arrived as screaming astropathic echoes. Terror called. The 7th was summoned home. Every ship, every company, every scattered detachment was ordered to break off and make for the cradle of mankind with all possible speed. Cassander read the Vox printout in the silence of his strategium, listening to the distant thunder of the citadels buried, engines and the whisper of the living stone iterating upon itself. "Lord," one of his lieutenants asked, "we leave?" "We are the Fist," Cassander answered. "Where our Gene-Sire commands, we go." The decision was not simple. Hydra Cordatus lay near the Eye of Terror, far from the direct warp routes to Terra. The strike cruiser assigned to Cassander's company had hung in orbit for years, a silent guardian above the Forge world, its machine spirit grown accustomed to slow patrols and sparse void traffic. They boarded in file. 200 yellow-armored giants, a few scores of serfs and servitors, the bare minimum to reactivate the cruiser's slumbering systems. The navigator died screaming. Cassander never saw the creature's true face. He heard the Vox report from the bridge, the flat, almost bemused tone of the ship's master as he described the event. "His third eye burst," the mortal said. Blood boiled from his sockets. He tore out his own. Tongue. "Lord, the warp has grown strange." The cruiser wallowed in unreality for a span that no one on board could later agree upon. Time in the Immaterium had always been treacherous, but this was different. The Geller field shrieked like a tortured thing. Machine spirits howled catechisms of error. Serfs tore at their own skin, as if things crawled beneath it. When the ship slammed back into real space, Hydra Cordatus hung before them once more. The system's star burned the same unsettling orange. The Forge world's night side glimmered with city lights, its day side bruised by dust storms. "Report," Cassander demanded, standing beneath the hololithic globe in the strategium. Astropaths, pale and shaking, relayed echoes. Names like Istvan, Kalth, Prospero, words that should never have been linked to betrayal, were chained together in sobbing psychic transmission. The name Horus came again and again, each repetition carrying the sour tang of treachery. "The War Master has turned upon the Emperor," one of the wretched psychers whispered, blood drying at the corners of his mouth. "Legions against legions, worlds burning. Terror calls for all loyal to return. The warp is wrong, Lord. It is full of teeth." 200 Imperial fists stood in silence. "We have no navigator," one lieutenant finally said. Without a navigator, a starship could still travel the warp. For a while, blind jumps, dead reckoning, luck, faith. Faith was for other legions. Cassander looked up at the hololith. It showed Hydra Cordatus and its moons, the local shipping lanes, the jagged scar of the Eye of Terror in the distant dark of the segmentum. It showed nothing of the fires now consuming the galaxy. It did not show Istvan's ash or Prospero's glass. It did not show Terra's distant, besieged light. "This world is our ward," Cassander said. His voice did not rise. It did not need to. "Our Gene Father entrusted it to us. If we die crossing the warp to reach him, Hydra Cordatus will stand undefended. If we remain, he will know where to find us." He turned his gaze on the waiting officers, each one a veteran clad in scarred ceramite, each one marked by years spent in the Emperor's wars. "We are already dead," he reminded them. "We have always been dead. Now we make that death count." The cruiser swung back into orbit around the Forge world, its hull still shuddering from the stress of translation. Cassander left a token crew aboard. The rest returned to the Cadmean Citadel. Below, the galaxy tore itself apart. Whole expeditionary fleets went to war with their own reflection. Ships that had once flown in formation turned their guns upon each other. Void shields, flaring and collapsing in cataclysmic chain reactions. Legions that had shed blood together on 100 worlds now hunted one another through the dark. Cities burned in their billions. Planets died. Some were subjected to extermination from orbit, their atmospheres lit like kindling until the crust cracked. Others were broken more slowly, trapped in the grinding teeth of civil war. Hydra Cordatus was only one world among uncounted billions. One fortress among more fortresses than any sane mind could tally. Its garrison numbered in the mere thousands, not the hundreds of thousands that bled on Istvan's black sands. Its fate should have been a footnote, lost under the tides of atrocity. It was not. On the bridge of the Iron Blood, Perturabo watched the hollow projection of the Forge world roll and tumble, the Cadmean Citadel picked out in cold runes and flickering motes of light. The Primarch of the 4th Legion sat in a throne grown from brass and black iron, the engines of the flagship resonating faintly through his armor. Around him, his captains waited. They were an ugly, scarred circle. Harkor, with his brutal, slab-faced impatience. Foryx, former first captain, cold and measured. Barban Falk, pale-eyed and thoughtful. Toramino, silent and watchful. Ascari Valkar, siege captain eager enough to almost vibrate in his plate. Lieutenant Kroger, jaw clenched so tight the corded muscles stood out beneath his skin. Hololithic representations of fleet dispositions flickered on the air between them. The aftermath of the Battle of Phal hung like a scar across several of the projections, a reminder of humiliation. "This one," Perturabo said. He spoke softly, but the word filled the strategium. One maimed gauntlet reached out, its broad fingers moving through the hollow of Hydra Cordatus. Rune tags expanded at his gesture, details blooming. Forge World, Adeptus Non, Tithe Grade, Cadmean Citadel, Imperial Fists Garrison, 42nd Company, population numbers that represented hundreds of thousands of workers, soldiers, serfs, near the Eye of Terror. A soft, almost imperceptible tightening around the eyes told those who knew him well that some equation had balanced in Perturabo's mind. "Not a primary supply node," murmured Foryx. "Not vital to Horus's advance. There are worlds of greater strategic value, Lord." Perturabo did not look at him. "We are not dogs," he said. "We do not run only where we are pointed. This is not about value. This is about proof." Harkor's lip curled. "Proof?" he asked. "Dorn boasts of his walls," Perturabo said, still watching the hollow. "He builds fortresses and hides behind them. He calls himself Praetorian. He dares to measure himself against me in works of stone and steel." He leaned back, golden eyes finally moving to take in his gathered sons. "So we will break his wall." Silence followed those words. Not dissent, not fear, calculation. Perturabo raised his hand. The hollow zoomed again, shrinking the Forge World's surface until only the mountain and its unnatural fortress remained. Lines of fire traced out likely artillery arcs, blast radius overlays, potential ingress routes. Numbers scrolled in. The air. Interactions of mass and velocity. Stress diagrams of hypothetical impacts. "The Cadmean Citadel," he said. "Ancient, self-repairing, self-defending, unknown technology. The Mechanicum cannot explain it. They call it living. They call it inviolate. The 7th holds it, so we will crack it." His gaze fixed on Ascari Valkar. "You will be my hammer," he said. Valkar's reaction was almost embarrassingly eager. He thumped his fist against his breastplate, the clang echoing through the chamber. "The 33rd Grand Battalion stands ready, Lord," he said. "Give me the Dominator cohort and the Tyranthicos, and I will take this citadel within a week. I will present you the head of the Imperial Fist Castellan at your feet." Perturabo's expression did not change. "1 week," he repeated, the words flat. "You would wager your life and the lives of all those under your command on that boast?" "Yes, Lord," Valkar said without hesitation. "Good," Perturabo murmured. "Then you may die with the knowledge that you believed yourself capable." He turned his attention to the others. "Forix, you will coordinate overall artillery and logistics. Harcourt, you will command the 23rd Grand Battalion. Falk, you will stand as Triarch over the Siege Council. Torremino, you will take the auxiliary cohorts. Kroger, you will serve under Harcourt as spearhead." They accepted their portions of duty with the curt nods and murmured affirmations of long habit. Each of them understood that there was more at stake here than a single fortress. The favor of their Primarch had grown distant since fall. This was an opportunity to prove, again, that Iron Warriors were not the beaten dogs the galaxy whispered them to be. Perturabo rose. "Prepare the fleet," he said. "We make for Hydra Cordatus. We will tear Dorn's symbol from his hands and grind it into the dust." The first wave of bombardment fell like the anger of a god that no longer cared enough to roar. Magma bombs, flung from orbit, hit the river valleys and agribelts with obscene precision. The weapons burrowed deep before they detonated, turning water into screaming steam and soil into molten glass. Entire stretches of farmland simply ceased to exist, replaced by smoking scars that glowed dull red for hours. Workers and soldiers caught in the open did not die in any way that left bodies to bury. They were turned into drifting, incandescent vapor. Mass drivers hurled iron rods the length of hab blocks into manufactoria and rail hubs. Impact turned buildings into expanding clouds of shrapnel. Train lines buckled and snapped, their cargoes of promethium and ammunition transformed into secondary explosions that chain reacted along entire transit nets. Void shields over key industrial zones flared and failed under the sustained punishment. Overloaded generators venting plasma and chewing their own crews. In the Cadmean citadel, the ground shook, but the walls endured. Cassandra stood in the command gallery, hands on the stone rail, watching as pick screens showed the valley below being methodically erased. The fortress's macro batteries answered where they could, firing at shapes in the upper atmosphere, at flashes of light that might be ships. The return fire was mostly futile. The Iron Warriors had anchored their bombardment ships at the very edge of effective range, far enough that the Citadel's guns could rarely find them. "Lord," said a voice at his back, "the outer habs are gone. The South Manufactorum district reports 90 out of every 100 casualties. The river is boiling." The numbers did not move him. He had seen far worse on worlds whose names he no longer bothered to remember. "Status of the gates?" he asked. "Unaffected," came the answer. "The mountain's roots absorbed the shock. The walls—" The speaker paused, then continued in a different tone. "The walls are repairing themselves faster than any damage is inflicted, Lord. The bombardment is little more than weather to the citadel." Cassandra glanced sideways. Techmarine Scannion stood there, crimson armor marked with the cog and skull of the Mechanicum and the black fist of the Seventh. Cable tendrils trailed from his back, snaking into the stone beneath their boots. Data scrawls flickered in the lenses of his helm, streaming across his vision in strings of sacred numerals and incomprehensible glyphs. "You have interfaced with it," Cassandra said. "I have attempted to," Scannion replied. "It is not a machine as we understand the term. There is structure, there is pattern, but it is like trying to read the language of a dead star. It acknowledges my presence. It does not obey. Yet it defends," Cassandra said. "It defends itself," Scannion corrected softly. "We are a tolerated infection, It will use us as it used those servitors at Compliance. If our deaths will strengthen it. Cassander looked back down into the valley. Then it has the spirit of an Imperial fist, he said. The captain turned away from the viewport. Civilians, he asked. Those that could reach the mountain before the bombardment intensified are filing in through the lower gates, reported an army colonel, his face grey with shock. Tens of thousands, Lord. Families, forge crews, entire regiments in disarray. We cannot hold them in the outer galleries. There is not enough air, not enough water, not enough space. Then we seal the lower habs, Cassander said. Civilians and non-essential personnel into the inner levels. Strip the manufactoria for anything that can be turned into a barricade or a weapon. Make ready to flood and vent the outer corridors if we must. The colonel swallowed. How many can we shelter, Lord? He asked. Scannion answered. 13,000, the tech marine said. If we wish to maintain functioning life support and power reserves for the garrison. More than that, and the strain will begin to degrade the fortress systems. Lights will fail, air will thin, the citadel will become as much an enemy as the Iron Warriors. Cassander considered that for a heartbeat. 13,000, he repeated. Then 13,000 live under our guns. The rest will have to find their fate in the valley. The colonel stared at him. Lord, we are not the Blood Angels, Cassander said. We do not gamble on miracles. We are the 7th. We do what can be done, and no more. Get them inside. 13,000 souls. No more. He knew what he was condemning. He knew what would happen to those trapped outside when the bombardment ceased and the ground forces landed. Death in fire would be the gentlest option. The Iron Warriors did not waste resources if they could be repurposed as labor. He felt the weight of those invisible faces pressing against his back, like a physical thing. A garrison is already dead the moment a siege begins. Cassander had believed that for as long as he could remember. It had always been abstract before, a doctrinal truth repeated in training halls and on parade grounds. Now it had numbers attached to it. He looked down at his hands, their knuckles yellow ceramite, and imagined for a moment that the stone beneath his palms was bone. Begin the intake, he said. The order went out. The citadel's gates yawned like the mouths of titans, swallowing columns of refugees and soldiers alike. The living fortress shuddered as its internal volumes shifted, walls thickening or thinning, galleries lengthening or collapsing to accommodate the new burdens within its belly. In the cratered valley far below, dust and smoke billowed. Then, through the churning haze, shapes descended. Drop barges, their hulls scarred iron, slammed into the ruined plains on trails of fire. Ramps crashed down, Iron Warriors marched into the storm. Later, there would be trenches, gun emplacements, a noose of artillery around the mountain. There would be saps and mines and countermines, assaults and counterattacks, months of grinding, attritional slaughter. For now, there was only a figure standing amid the settling dust, his armor gunmetal and hazard stripe, his face a pale, calculating mask beneath a crest of black and brass. Perturabo gazed up at the Cadmean citadel. Sultan Vul Bron stood at his side, the stone-wrought armor caked in grey dust from a dozen worlds, a heavy entrenching tool strapped at his hip like a relic blade. His eyes were half closed, as though listening to something only he could hear. It is strong, Perturabo said, not as praise, but as a statement of fact. Yes, Vulbron replied. His voice was rough, scraped by stone dust and years of shouting orders over the roar of artillery. The rock is old. The structure is older. It has survived more sieges than we have names for. And everything breaks, the stone-wrought said. You taught me that, Lord. Perturabo nodded, still watching the fortress. From this angle, the walls seemed almost to lean outward, like the edges of a trapped beast bristling. This is not a battle, he said. It is a proof. Stone, flesh, pride. Apply enough pressure and all of them crack. He turned his head, just enough that Cassander might have imagined, had he been able to see through kilometers of air and smoke and earth, that their eyes met. "Begin the siege," Perturabo said. Ash fell in slow curtains, turning the valley floor into a grey sea. The first dropships had come in low and fast, skimming through the turbulence left by the orbital strikes. Their hulls were striped in black and yellow, iron grey under the soot. Engines howled. Retro thrusters hammered craters into the already shattered ground. Ramps slammed down, and the Iron Warriors marched into the teeth of the guns. They came in ordered blocks, the legionaries a wall of metal and hatred. Behind and between them trudged the human auxiliaries, thousands of men in stained uniforms and scavenged armor, some bearing the colors of worlds long since murdered for refusing compliance. Artillery crawled down from the sky in sections, towed by track units or hauled by clanking engine walkers. Gun carriages as tall as habs dug their supports into the broken soil with the slow relish of burrowing beasts. Above, the Cadmean citadel watched. Its guns spoke in answer, vast barrels hurling shells the size of ground cars. The first salvo tore open the plain, smashing entire platoons into bloody vapor, crumpling artillery pieces like toys. One shell found a dropship that had not yet disgorged its cargo. The craft disintegrated in a flash of light and armor fragments, raining burning metal down on the Iron Warriors below. They did not break. They did not scatter. Under the direction of their centurions and warsmiths, the traitor legion spread out, forming a ring of steel that stayed just beyond the extremity of the citadel's direct fire. Vox barks and coded light signals passed between them, linking each advancing element into a growing pattern. 40,000 meters from the mountain, the first trench lines were cut. Labor gangs of human auxiliaries and press-ganged locals went to work with shovels, grav spades, and explosive charges. Chains clanked on their wrists. Overseers stalked the lines, their whips crackling with captive lightning, their lasguns ready. The ground was still hot in places. Steam hissed from fissures where magma bombs had gouged into the planet's skin. Men burned their hands on tools that grew too warm, then kept digging because they had seen what happened to those who did not. Iron Warriors' engineers worked among them, armor spattered with wet soil and darker stains. They moved with practiced ease, marking out the zigzag pattern of approach saps, calculating angles of defilade, measuring the range of the fortress guns by the cadence of incoming fire. Cassander watched the lines grow. From the Cadmean battlements, the valley was a bowl of smoke and fire. Through rents in the cloud, he could see flashes of yellow and black hazard stripes on armored shoulders, the glint of metal where artillery crews dragged themselves closer to the mountain. Every distance was marked. Every concentration of enemy force drew counter-battery fire. "Westward flank, second battery," he said. "Walk your fire 30 meters left. You are overranging." Acknowledgement snapped back down the Vox. The fortress guns shifted. A new pattern of devastation walked across the newly dug trenches, turning men and weapons into mangled meat and wreckage. For a few breaths, the advancing Iron Warriors paused, ducking into cover, hauling corpses into makeshift breastworks. The fortress flexed around Cassander. He felt it through his boots and gauntlets more than he saw it. The living stone shuddered with each impact, then flowed to compensate. Cracks opened, ran for a few centimeters, then vanished as the mineral flesh knitted itself whole. Where a shell had struck and gouged out a chunk of parapet, new stone extruded from the wound, pushing itself into a slick, wet bulge that hardened and darkened in a matter of heartbeats. On the steeper faces of the mountain, the citadel's more vicious instincts were on display. Recon squads from the 23rd Grand Battalion had tried to climb in the shadow of the bombardment, hoping to find blind spots in the guns' overlapping arcs. Cassander had watched their attempt through magnification lenses. They were good troops, those Iron Warriors, disciplined, methodical. They moved from rock to rock, their armor dulled and camouflaged, their sergeants planting signal beacons at intervals for the artillery to reference. The mountain reacted like an organism sensing a parasite, Smooth stone bulged and sharpened under their gloved fingers. Ridges became spines, growing with obscene speed, punching through ceramite and flesh alike. One iron warrior lost his grip as the ledge beneath him liquefied. He fell, snatching at an outcrop that was not there a moment before, and then was. Only it was a spike, a blade, a spear of mineral that lanced through his forearm and into his chest. He hung there, twitching, impaled, until the stone flowed again and simply swallowed him. Elsewhere, cavities opened. One moment, a pair of traitor legionaries were crouched in narrow crevices, catching their breath. The next, the walls yawned inward, teeth of crystal and obsidian snapping shut around them. The gaps sealed, leaving only faint, almost pretty ripples on the surface. Fists of the 7th Legion had seen men vanish in that way during the compliance demonstration. It was different, watching it consume Astartes. "Is it reacting to them specifically?" Cassander asked, still studying the magnified image. "No," Techmarine Scannion answered. Cogitator voiced, cables interfaced with the rail at his side. "It responds to stress on its surface, to pressure and vibration. It knows something is climbing it. It does not yet care whose armor they wear." "Yet," Cassander murmured. Scannion's helm lenses flickered with data streams. He had been linked to the fortress for hours, relaying targeting solutions, damage reports, fluctuations in power flow, and stress density through the mountain. Machine code whispered through him and out again. It was not obedience, what passed between the citadel and his implants. It was more like a negotiation. A quake rippled through the stone. Somewhere to the east, an Iron Warrior's shell had found a partially exposed vein of the mineral matrix and detonated at the right resonance. The fortress shivered. Cracks spidered out, then halted, then closed, but slower this time, as though the living rock had to think about the repair. "Their gunnery grows more accurate," Scannion said. "They have tested calibers and timings. They are learning the frequency patterns that stress our defenses without shattering them outright." Cassander grunted. "That is what they are," he said. "Iron within, iron without. They probe and probe until something gives. They are not interested in glory, only in pressure." "We are no different," Scannion replied. "We probe back with our guns. We ration our shells and our blood. We may not enjoy admitting the kinship, but it is there." Cassander said nothing. The purely logical kinship between the 7th and the 4th had never troubled him. What disturbed him was how easily he could see that truth now, watching the slow construction of the siege lines below. Guns answered guns. The Iron Warriors brought up long-barreled siege cannon, quad mortars, artillery whose patterns were known to Cassander's long memory and whose smells he could almost taste from this distance. They built revetments and dugouts around them, cut blast channels into the ground with explosives and servitor crews. They tested ranges with single probing shots, then with bracketing bursts, then with full salvos that raked the fortress faces in shuddering curtains of steel. The Cadmean citadel rocked with each impact. Plates buckled, then smoothed. Galleries collapsed and reformed. Void pockets opened in the stone to swallow shockwaves, then vented the force elsewhere, turning corridors into wind tunnels of displaced pressure that knocked men from their feet and burst eardrums. Imperial fists counterfired from the bastions, their macro batteries and heavy cannon answering shot with shot. Targeting cogitators and mortal gun captains coolly prioritized threats. Iron Warriors' guns that burned too long in one position were identified, bracketed, annihilated. Trench sections that became too dense with enemy infantry were pulped into slurry under heavy shells. The casualty ledgers thickened. In the fortress, numbers were chalked on slate, scrawled in the margins of data slates, committed to memory. So many shells expended, so many guns destroyed, so many auxiliaries killed, so many legionaries lost. Each datum was another tick in a ledger that had no space for words like grief or pity. Outside, the Iron Warriors kept their own accounts. Warsmiths and centurions conferred in dugouts and armoured command crawlers, their faces illuminated by flickering lumen strips and cogitator screens. Casualty tables and projections scrolled past in hard green light. They did not speak of the dead as men. They spoke of squads rendered non-functional, units degraded below threshold, formations no longer capable of assigned tasks. A cohort was a number. A trench line was a number. A life was a weight pressed down on the scales of necessity. Under artillery fire that never entirely ceased, the saps crawled closer. Zigzag trenches progressed. Up the slopes, an ugly scar of churned mud and broken bodies. The approach angles were calculated to minimize exposure to direct fire, to twist away from the worst of the Citadel's gun arcs. But there was no way to avoid the rain of shells entirely. Men dug, then fell, then were buried. New men climbed over the soft earth that covered them and dug again. Iron Warrior's engineers moved along the saps like priests, checking alignment, correcting cowardice with a bolt round to the spine if necessary. They adjusted the angle of each turn by fractions, ensuring that no direct line of fire from the fortress could sweep an entire length of trench. They were not gentle. Auxiliaries who failed to keep pace were simply left where they fell and incorporated into the walls as they hardened with packed soil and blood. A man in the 20th sap took a lasburn to the thigh and dropped into the muck, scrabbling at his leg. The comrade behind him cursed and kicked him aside, planting his own shovel where the wounded man's had fallen. The next artillery crash dropped a curtain of dirt that half buried the wounded soldier. He screamed and clawed his way out, only to find a commissar figure standing above him, Iron Warrior's colours on his chest, bolt pistol in hand. The pistol barked. The screaming stopped. The corpse was kicked into the trench wall, tamped down by boots and shovel blows, blood darkening the soil. "Keep digging," the overseer said. Within the fortress, life constricted. The 13,000 souls granted entry to the Citadel's interior worlds were packed into galleries and manufactoria, shrines and pressure-sealed bunkers. Whole families slept in chapel naves between rows of votive candles that guttered in the recycled air. Forge crews huddled in what had once been storage halls, their worldly possessions crammed into crates around them. Solar Auxiliar Grenadiers and Imperial Army regiments camped in assembly tunnels and hangar bays, their kit stacked in neat piles, their weapons cleaned and recleaned. Air was rationed. The adepts of the Mechanicum cut power to non-essential circulation systems, diverting every watt to guns and shield projectors. Lumen strips dimmed. The air grew thick with sweat and enclosed breath. Water was measured in sips. Food, never plentiful, became thin rations of corpse starch and recycled protein. Discipline grew sharp. An Imperial army trooper caught stealing an extra ration from a supply crate found himself dragged before a fist. The Astartes asked no questions. The bolt pistol shot took the man's head from his shoulders. The corpse was left where it fell for a time, as an object lesson. The crowd that had gathered around the crate dispersed without needing words. A would-be deserter tried to force his way back towards the lower gates, babbling that he would take his chances in the valley rather than die entombed in stone. He made it as far as the second internal checkpoint. A Solar Auxiliar sergeant met him with the butt of his las rifle, breaking his teeth and nose. Later, when the man tried again, the sergeant simply shot him in the stomach and left him to bleed on the stone. There were no priests to preach serenity, no soft words about the Emperor's loving light. The Forge world had been brought into compliance under the secular mandate of the 7th Legion. The only sermons here were orders. Cassander walked the galleries with other fists at his back, helmet lenses reflecting cramped faces and hollow eyes. He saw fear, madness, resignation. Once he paused as a man knelt in a corner, hands clasped, lips moving silently. The sign carved on the wall above him was an old, pre-Imperial rune, something the compliance edicts should have scrubbed away. "Who do you pray to?" Cassander asked. The man looked up, tears tracking through the grime on his face. "To anyone who hears," he said. Cassander let him live, not from mercy, from practicality. If the man found enough hope in his old symbols to stay at his post when the Iron Warriors breached the halls, then those scratches in the stone were a weapon like any other. On the upper ramparts, the Astartes watched the siege lines creep closer and named the men trying to kill them. They could not see faces from this distance, not clearly, but patterns emerged. "There," said Locris, one of Cassander's lieutenants, pointing with a gauntleted hand. "The heavy batteries along the western flank, the ones that fire only when the fortress guns focus elsewhere." Cassander followed his gesture. Gun platforms under rough rockcrete shelters, crews moving with disciplined economy. A single command figure moved among them, issuing orders with calm assurance, always positioned where the incoming counter-battery fire would not hit him. "Voyeur," Locris said, "the one who watches and only strikes when it is safe. He waits, measures, then fires." "Agreed," Cassander said. He shifted his gaze. The saps in the southern approaches. Those advance in neat little steps, perfect spacing, textbook work. "Digger," Locris replied. "He respects the manuals, follows every rule of siegecraft." They found another. "See how the trenches on the eastern flank intersect," Locris went on. "Sloppy, wasteful. He is digging for the sake of digging, not to a plan. He just wants to get closer and throw men at the walls." "Scrapper," Cassander said. "He likes the feel of the fight more than its logic." "And that one," Locris finished, nodding to a cluster of never quite complete emplacements to the north. Guns were dragged up, installed, then abandoned, then dragged elsewhere. Saps began, then halted. Infantry lines advanced, then fell back without orders. "Malingerer," Cassander said. "He does just enough to avoid reprimand, then does nothing useful." They could have used names. The 7th Legion kept meticulous records. They could have matched battalion markings and command ciphers to their enemies' actual identities. They did not. Names were intimacy. These men were functions. Still, the nicknames spread through the fists. Scrapper, Digger, Malingerer, Voyeur. A tiny, bitter thrust of contempt against opponents who deserved none of their respect and all of their hatred. 3 months turned the Cadman's citadel into a scar. Galleries that had once been smooth and gleaming were spiderwebbed with fissures. Towers leaned a fraction of a degree off true, their foundations warped by sustained concussive force. Some sections of the living stone no longer healed properly. Repairs became patchwork, ridges and bulges of misaligned mineral leaving ugly scars where once there had been seamless surfaces. In the galleries, the air grew worse. Filters clogged, pumps strained. Some sections were sealed entirely, choking hundreds of civilians behind bulkhead doors that would never reopen. The fortress simply rerouted its pathways around them and forgot there had ever been anything alive in those spaces. Scannion died in the 3rd month. Cassander watched it happen from 3 corridors away, through the eyes of picked feeds slaved to his helm. The tech marine had gone down into one of the deep junction vaults to repair a damaged coupling between the fortress's own power conduits and the Mechanicum's patchwork additions. The Iron Warriors had learned a new trick, sending delayed fuse penetrator shells that buried themselves deep into the mountain before detonating. One such shell found the vault. The detonation turned 10 meters of stone and ceramite into shards. The picked feed dissolved into a storm of static as shrapnel scythed through servitors and tech adepts. Scannion stood at the heart of it, his mechadendrites spread, armor lit by the glow of overloading systems. For a heartbeat, the living stone around him tried to flow into a shield. It was not fast enough. The blast tore him apart. Cassander saw a last flare of pale blue from the tech marine's optic lenses. Then the feed went black. In the hours that followed, the fortress healed the rent. The stone flowed inward, sealing the gap. The conduits reknit themselves, but more slowly than before, the patterns less elegant, like scar tissue. Weapons arrays flickered and dropped offline for several crucial minutes. Whole sections of the Citadel's outer guns went silent while the system rerouted power. On the battlements, Cassander felt the subtle shift. The Citadel had lost something, not sentience, not will. It had lost a translator, a point of contact between itself and the mortals infesting its interior. Scannion had been its priest as much as its engineer. In his absence, the fortress became more truly itself, less accommodating, less inclined to listen. "Their shells are learning," Locris said quietly, watching a section of wall where the repairs took longer to harden. "We are all learning," Cassander answered. He took stock of his company that night, under the orange glow of flickering lumen strips in the Strategium. 73 dead, reported Locris. 44 more too badly wounded to return to the walls. Of the original 200, we have 83 battle-capable brothers remaining. Cassander considered it. "Less than half," he said. "Yes." "And the army?" "Thousands gone," Locris said. "We have stopped counting individual soldiers. We track units, capability, effective firepower. The solar auxilia are holding, the planetary defense regiments less so. The civilians," he trailed off, "are dying," Cassander finished. "In crowded galleries, in sealed sections, under the shells. They are already dead. Our task is only to choose how fast they realize it." Every night, or what passed for night in that constant tremor of war, Cassander held his councils with the surviving officers. They gathered around a scarred, hololith table that flickered as the power fluctuated. Data feeds traced the advancing trenches and saps, the positions of Iron Warriors' artillery, the projected paths of future assaults. Suggestions were made, sorties planned, calculations rendered. "We could strike this sector," suggested one lieutenant, tapping at a map section where Scrapper's works pressed too close to a weak point. Nightfall, silent climb, bolt pistols and blades, hit their command post, their forward rocket batteries, set them back weeks. "And lose how many?" Cassander asked. "Half the force we commit," came the answer, grimly honest. "More, perhaps, but we make them bleed." "We can make them bleed from here," said another, gesturing to the guns. "Static defense costs fewer lives. We trade ammunition instead of blood." "We trade ammunition and blood and the lives of the people under our feet," Cassander said. "Every day we stay behind these walls, more civilians die. Every day we sally, more Astartes die. There is no path that does not end in a grave, brothers. All we decide is who reaches it first." In the end, he chose a compromise that pleased no one and was therefore probably the least foolish option. Limited sorties, hard, brutal lightning raids launched under cover of their own artillery, aimed not at heroics, but at destroying specific enemy assets that threatened the fortress most directly. Enough to slow the Iron Warriors, not enough to burn out his company entirely in doomed gallantry. He slept rarely. When he did, it was in his armor, helmet resting beside the cot, bolter within reach of his gauntlet. Dreams were brief and full of dust. Perturabo slept even less. In the command dugout that the Iron Warriors had cut into a fold of the valley wall, the Primarch spent his hours in contemplation of the siege's mathematics. Hololithic displays surrounded him, each showing a different facet of the conflict. Stress diagrams of mountain, strata, projectile trajectory patterns, casualty graphs, ammunition expenditure curves. The Iron Circle stood like statues at the edges of the chamber, their hulking automaton forms silent, optics dim. Sultan Volbron came and went, bringing reports from the trenches, from the saps, from the engineer cadres gnawing at the mountain. Warsmiths submitted their assessments in person, then withdrew under the weight of their genesire's indifference. He did not rage, he did not threaten, he simply watched and calculated. When he spoke, it was to ask for a specific number, a ratio, a projection. When he gave orders, they were precise and impersonal, no more emotional than a set of instructions given to a machine. The Iron Warriors feared him more now than they had when he had torn Valkar apart. Rage could be anticipated, perhaps even diverted. This cold distance could not. "Lord," Foryx said at one point, kneeling on one knee, helm at his side. "Our casualties are rising, faster than projected. The fortress's repairs have slowed, but it still absorbs more of our fire than we can account for. At current rates, we will bleed out before we breach." Perturabo looked at him. "Then adjust the rates," he said simply. It was not callousness. It was not even cruelty in the sense that mortal men understood the word. To Perturabo, the lives of those under his command were elements in an equation. If the equation did not balance, one changed the elements until it did. The screams in the trenches were the noise of the machine operating as intended. Outside, the siege ground on. Artillery flashes strobed against the mountain. The trenches crept forward, sometimes only a handful of meters in a day. Men died by the thousands for those meters, their bodies compressed into the earth by boot and tool, flesh and bone becoming part of the glacis over which the next wave advanced. Inside the Cadmean citadel, civilians prayed in the dark, their whispered words devoured by vents and ducts. Some begged the emperor to notice them, even though the doctrine of this world had never truly taught them. He listened. Others prayed to older things, to nameless spirits of stone and fire that had been worshipped here long before the Imperium came. None of those entities answered. The only gods that strode the valley wore armor and commanded guns. Imperial fists and iron warriors alike slept in their war panoply, when they slept at all. Helmets propped within easy reach, weapons laid across their chests. More than one woke to find the man lying next to him had died between one breath and the next, fatigue and stress and shrapnel having finally claimed a debt. The war had become a slow bleed, 1,000 tiny cuts, each insignificant on its own, together draining strength from both fortress and besieger. No single moment of glory, no heroic charge, just the relentless grinding down of stone and flesh under the weight of unending fire. The Cadmean citadel endured, the Iron Warriors endured. Between them, Hydra Cordatus screamed and burned. The siege lines had stalled in a ring of iron and bone. Trench teeth gnawed at the mountain's flanks. Guns roared and fell silent and roared again. Men died in their thousands, and still the Cadmean citadel stood. Perturabo sat in his dugout throne and watched the pattern without expression. The hololithic mountain turned slowly before him, overlays pulsing in different shades to show stress fractures, heat signatures, ammunition stocks, projected casualty curves. Trench lines crawled up the slopes in jagged threads. Arcs of fire intersected. Shell impacts pulsed like saws. The Primarch's damaged gauntlet rested on one arm of the chair, fingers tapping slowly on the metal, as if counting. Valkar knelt in the dirt before him, helm clutched under one arm. His cataphractii plate was scarred and soot-stained from a dozen lesser actions on a dozen other worlds. His dark eyes watched the shifting hololith as a starving man might study a laden table. "You see the problem," Perturabo said at last, without looking down. Valkar did not hesitate. "We are bleeding," he said. "Slowly, uselessly. Each day costs us guns and men for gains measured in the height of a man. At this rate, we will grind ourselves to dust without ever touching the gates." "And whose fault is that?" Perturabo asked. "All of ours," Valkar said carefully. "Mine, Foryx's, Harkor's, Folk's. We have not been bold enough. We have not applied sufficient pressure to a single point." A faint twitch at the corner of the Primarch's mouth might have been amusement. "You blame yourself," he said. "Good. You were there at Fall." The word hung in the air like a curse. Around the hololith table, the other warsmiths and captains stiffened. Foryx's jaw locked. Harkor's hands tightened on the haft of his chain axe. Kroger, standing at the rear, looked down, eyes shuttered. Valkar bowed his head lower. "Yes, Lord," he said. "I commanded the 33rd Grand Battalion. I failed you there." Perturabo's gaze slid across the hololith, flicking through data displays until he found the legend he wanted. Siege assets, Elite formations, unit readiness. You led the Dominator cohort, he said. The Tyranthicos. Yes, Lord. And they live still. Those who survived Fal, yes. They will march with you. Valkar's fingers dug into his helm. For a heartbeat, raw hunger flared in his expression. Recognition, opportunity, a chance to stand before his gene sire not as a reminder of failure, but as an example of remediation. You will take the 33rd Grand Battalion, Perturabo went on. You will take the Tyranthicos. The Dominators will anchor your assault. You will focus all your strength upon the Western Gate complex. I will give you artillery priority for as long as is necessary to weaken it. You will break the gates. You will enter the fortress. You will not stop until the Citadel's heart is exposed. He turned his golden eyes fully on Valkar for the first time. Do this, he said, and when I think of Fall, I will not see only failure. Valkar's throat worked. He bowed until his brow touched the dirt. This is more than I deserve, Lord, he said. It is exactly what you deserve, Perturabo replied. A chance to prove whether your existence is still a net gain to this legion, or an error to be erased. The captains and warsmiths around them said nothing. None of them envied Valkar the honor. All of them coveted it. That was the way of the Fourth. Later, in the command shelter carved for the 33rd, Valkar stood over his own table, a rough steel plate pitted by the impact of years of fists and knives. The hololithic projection here was smaller, dirtier, but it showed the same mountain, the same gate bastions, the same trench lines, like veins. Gallan Dion stood at his side. The veteran Tyranthicos sergeant's armor was a hulking slab of ceramite, its plates thickened and cross-braced, dangerous even at rest. The cataphracti pauldrons rose high over his shoulders, scarred by old impacts. His face was a map of burns and shrapnel scars, half hidden by the cabling that fed into his cranium plate. You wanted this, Dion said, his voice a gravel rasp. There was no obeisance in it, only fact. He had known Valkar too long to pretend otherwise. Yes, Valkar admitted. From the moment we cut our way out of Fal, I have wanted this. The memory flashed between them without words. Void war in the lightless gulf, ships dying with all hands, the shame of disengagement. For the Iron Warriors, failure was not forgotten. It was carried like a brand under the skin. This is not fall, Dion said. This is stone and earth. This is what we were made for. Exactly, Valkar said. We will show them, the 7th, the other legions, our own brothers. We will show Perturabo. He stabbed a finger into the projection. Here, he said, the outer gates. The walls are thickest around them, the glasses steepest. The fortress knows they are the key. That is why we take them. We will not skirt around. We will not gnaw at the flanks. We will drive a spike into the heart. Dion's gaze traced the highlighted area. He saw the same things Valkar did. Overlapping arcs of fire from bastions. Kill zones layered like strata. Natural and artificial obstacles combined into a geometry of murder. It will cost, Dion said. Valkar's mouth pulled into something between a smile and a snarl. It will cost everything, he said. Do you think Perturabo gave me this for a neat and tidy solution? He gave it to me because he wants to see what is left when the 33rd Grand Battalion has been fed into the furnace. He wants to see whether anything remains to hold shape, under that heat. He wants to see whether I remain. He looked up at Dion, and for a moment, the mask slipped. The hunger there was almost painful to witness. Not for survival, for significance. I will not be forgotten as the fool of Fal, Valkar said quietly. If I must build a monument out of the corpses of every man under my command to be seen, then I will do it. Dion held his gaze for a measured span, then nodded once. Then we build, he said. The bombardment shifted. Iron Warriors' artillery that had been parceled out along the siege lines now drew inward, retasked by orders that bore Perturabo's personal encryption. Long-barreled siege cannon rotated, their muzzles grinding on their mountings as they swung to converge on the western gates. Rocket batteries adjusted elevation, mortar pits reoriented. Cogitator banks were reprogrammed with new sequences, new timing intervals, new firing solutions. The first salvos walked across the gate bastions with brutal slowness. Heavy shells, their casings etched with hazard stripes and kill tallies, screamed through the air. Some detonated on impact, turning the upper layers of stone into flying shards. Others burrowed deep before exploding, their shaped charges focused inward to send waves of force into the mountain's bones. The Cadmean citadel reacted as it always had. Stone flowed, knitting itself across the incoming wounds. Cracks closed, fissures sealed. But this was not random damage. This was percussion with intent. The Iron Warriors had learned which calibers and frequencies set up resonances in the mineral matrix. They had mapped the paths of least resistance within the mountain's interior. They had learned where the fortress's living flesh was thickest and where it was thin. They played it like an instrument. From the walls, Imperial fists watched sections of parapet tremble under the sustained impacts. Where once the stone had flowed like water, now it oozed, sluggish, bare fractures remaining visible for longer before the silicate could smooth them. Hairline cracks spread outward from the gates themselves, tiny and fragile and terrifying. "Stress is building," murmured an adept, his mechadendrites twitching as they read Auspec's data. "Pressure differential climbing. The rock is absorbing more force than it can process." "Can we relieve it?" Cassandra asked. "Not without venting along other fulcrums," the adept replied. "We could deliberately collapse sections of the mountain's spine to take the strain." "Which sections?" "Inner hab galleries, some of the refuges, the flooded manufactoria levels." Cassandra's jaw tightened. "Not yet," he said. Below, in the trenches, Valkar paced along the firing step of the forward command post, watching the gate sector through the overlapping curtains of dust and smoke. Each shell impact was a hammerstroke, each plume of shattered stone another step towards the moment he craved. "Again," he said into the Vox. Guns spoke. The valley echoed with their bellow. The gates endured, but now they groaned audibly, even over the distant thunder, a low grinding rumble that was not the voice of any natural rock. At last, the fortress faltered. A section of wall to the left of the gatehouse slumped, sagging as the stone failed to harden in time. For several breaths it was a half-liquid mass, shells punching deep into its soft bulk, turning it into a slurry of shattered silicate and pulverized mineral. When it finally solidified, it did so wrong, a cracked, crazed surface spiderwebbed with visible fractures. "Now!" Valkar said. The Iron Warriors went forward. Armored spearheads rolled out of their covered assembly points, tracks grinding over rubble and corpses. Siege tanks, with reinforced prows and extra carapace plating led the way, their hulls decorated with hazard chevrons and kill markers carved into their armor. Behind them came the transports, armor crammed with infantry, hatches sealed. At the column's core, the Taranthicos marched. Cataphractii plate clanked as it moved, overlapping slabs of ceramite and adamantium scraping against each other. Power fists glowed with banked energy. Combi bolters hung from armored fists, their muzzles already dirty with soot. Each Terminator advanced at the same measured pace, their bootfalls making the ground vibrate. Valkar strode at their head. His own armor was a baroque mass of reinforced plating and brutal embellishments, warplate built for the slow, unstoppable advance of the siegebreaker. Chain teeth whirred at the edge of his thunderhammer's head in anticipation. His voice boomed over the Voxnet, layered with command encryptions that carried not just words, but intent. "We advance," he said. "We do not falter. We do not let the dead slow us. We make this mountain remember us." Artillery fire fell around them like rain. Shells from the iron. Warriors' own batteries walked ahead of the assault, a curtain of explosions that clawed at the gates and the broken wall section. Cassandra's guns answered, throwing shots into the advancing formations with as much precision as the smoke and disruption would allow. Tanks vanished in gouts of orange flame and black smoke. Transports flipped, spilling burning bodies into the churned earth. Human auxiliaries ran ahead of the armored column, pressed forward by commissars and legionary overseers. Some carried breaching charges and assault ladders, others carried only laser guns, and the knowledge that their deaths would briefly draw fire away from the more valuable assets behind them. The ground leading up to the gates had once been a wide, clean kill zone, a glacis with carefully calculated gradients and angles. Now it was a layered stratum of bodies and wreckage. Auxiliary corpses lay in drifts, their flesh churned to paste by tank tracks. Legionary dead, their armor cracked and blackened, formed ridges and hummocks. Servitors, blown apart, added tangles of metal and meat to the mass. The smell was a thick, greasy reek that clung to armor intakes and filled filters. The 33rd Grand Battalion advanced over it all. At the gates, the defenders were waiting. Cassander had stripped units from less critical sectors to reinforce the western bastions. Imperial fists stood shoulder to shoulder along parapets and behind embrasures, their yellow armor blackened by soot and scorched by near misses. Solar auxilia. Grenadiers of Chalcidian make formed ranks behind low walls and barricades, bronze armor dulled under a film of dust, their Lazrafals shouldered. Mechanicum Tech Guard and Thalax battle automata lurked in the deeper recesses, their optics burning cold. The gatehouse itself bristled with weaponry. Macro bolters, heavy laser rays, missile tubes, all slaved to targeting cogitators that tracked movement across the ruined glacis. The living stone, around the gates, still reacted, extruding sudden ridges and spines, opening vents that spewed superheated steam or jets of corrosive chemicals. The first wave of auxiliaries hit that storm and came apart. Lasfire from the Chalcidian lines cut them down in rows, flickers of light punching neat holes through flesh and cloth. Heavy bolter shells from the bastions detonated within the press of bodies, turning men into clouds of shredded meat and bone fragments. The citadel's own defenses added their cruel flourish. A section of ground liquefied under the feet of a rushing cohort, swallowing them to the waist before hardening again. Men screamed and clawed at the stone as it solidified around their legs, then screamed louder as artillery blasts and falling debris tore at their trapped torsos. Behind them, Valkar's armor pushed through. "Forward," he roared. "Do not waste what they have bought for you." Tanks ground over the screaming trapped men without slowing. Tracks, crushing torsos and snapping spines. The Dominators tramped into the gaps opened by fallen vehicles, their heavy boots sinking into corpses and shattered stone. Bolter fire spat from their weapons, thick streams of mass-reactive death that corkscrewed into firing slits and embrasures, blowing defenders apart within their positions. For a time, it was simple slaughter. The Iron Warriors' concentrated fire had done its work. The gate bastions were cracked and smoking. Some weapons hung dead in their mountings, barrels split or casings warped. The living stone was veined with fissures that bled dust. Under that pressure, under the hammer blows of Valkar's spearhead, the citadel groaned. Then Cassander played the card he had been holding. "Release the Castellax," he said. Massive, hunched shapes lumbered out of their alcoves and into the deeper galleries behind the gatehouse. Castellax battle automata, their chassis bulked with plating, their arm weapon mounts bristling with Mauler cannon and bolter arrays, their optic lenses burning a steady, baleful red. At their head walked the Forge Lord, his own armor a symbiosis of 7th Legion plate and Mechanicum grafting, servo arms rising from his backpack in a crown of steel. "Target the spearhead," he ordered, voice relayed through the noospheric link. The machines surged forward. They hit the interior of the gate complex at a loping run, legs piston hammering with inhuman force. Their guns opened up in unison. Streams of explosive shells and high-caliber slugs tore into the breaching Iron Warriors. Terminator plate that had shrugged off lesser blows now cracked under the concentrated fury. A Dominator's arm vanished from the elbow down, blown away by repeated hits. Another's torso was punched through, the massive warrior staggering as holes stayed open where armor should have flowed to close. Some Castellax carried darkfire lances. Beams of ravening energy stabbed out, shearing through tank, hulls melting armor, turning ceramite into dripping sludge that hissed as it hit the cooling stone. The Tyranthicos met them head-on. Galen Dion saw one of his brothers vanish in a haze of fire, his cataphracti suit reduced to a smoking crater. He bellowed wordless defiance and charged, thunderhammer raised. The Castellax looming before him swung an arm to swat him aside, motion so fast it blurred despite the mass involved. The blow would have pulped a mortal. Dion took it on his shoulder pad, armor shrieking as it deformed, and kept going. His hammer came down. The weapon's disruptor coils flared, chain teeth screaming as they bit into the automaton's hull. The force of the impact drove Dion to one knee. The Castellax's chestplate buckled, then collapsed inward, internal machinery shattering. The machine staggered, servos whining, and collapsed, crashing to the ground in a spray of sparks and leaking oil. More came on behind it. The gate approach became a killing funnel, a place where all the careful geometry of fortress design expressed itself in pure, intimate murder. Iron warriors and Imperial fists alike fought at ranges so close they could taste each other's breath through their filters. Chains words bit and stuck in armor. Power fists crushed limbs and helmets. Bolter muzzle flashes strobed the gloom, making every movement staccato. The living stone added its own chaos. Sections of wall, already weakened by the bombardment, chose that moment to fail outright. Blocks of mineral flesh the size of transport carriers tore free and crashed down, pulverizing men from both sides beneath them. The citadel tried to repair the damage even as it widened. New growth thrust itself between fallen slabs, jamming them, pinning wounded under half-formed bulges of rock. The 33rd Grand Battalion was being fed into a grinder. For every meter they advanced, they paid in squads. For every Castellax they brought down, another Iron Warrior die-cast his last curse into the stone with his blood. The Tyranthicos were forced to throw themselves into situations that would have counted as suicidal even by Terminator standards, simply to keep momentum.
Please support the channel and check out the link below for the best merch.
They waded through waist-deep drifts of corpses and debris, the ground so saturated with blood that their boots left suction noises as they lifted. Cassander watched from a higher vantage, helm lenses tracking the flow of the battle. "Pull the auxilia back from the inner line," he ordered. "We will hold the second tier with Astartes and the machines. Use the grenadiers for counterattacks where our brothers fall." A colonel relayed the order. Chalcodian troops withdrew in good order, stepping over piles of dead and dying without flinching, ranks closing neatly around casualties. They knew that if the fists failed, nothing they could do would save them. Valkar felt the battle slipping like sand through his gauntlets. He stood in the lee of a shattered wall section, armor pitted and scored, thunderhammer clogged with gore. There were fewer Tyranthicos around him now. He had been counting without realizing it, tallying the gaps where certain silhouettes should have been. The Voxnet was a cacophony of requests, warnings, death screams, and the curt flat reports of squads rendered combat ineffective. "Forward," he snarled. "We are almost through. You feel it, do you not? The stone is failing. One more push. One more sacrifice. Then we are within, and it is ours." He voxed to the rear, to officers whose names he had known since Fall. "Commit reserves," he said. "All of them. Infantry, armor, sappers, everything. I want the 33rd inside this fortress, or dead beneath its walls before this day ends." There was a pause, infinitesimal but real, as the men hearing that order understood it fully. Then affirmations came. Not one dared gainsay him. Auxiliary cohorts that had been kept back as a notional second wave were whipped forward. Men who had been catching breath in dugouts were shoved out into the bombardment. Armor reserves that were supposed to remain in support positions rolled into the meat grinder. The neat lines of the 33rd's order of battle began to blur, formations intermingling in a desperate heave towards the gates. Dion felt it like a pressure at his back. He had fought sieges all his life. He knew the scent of a battle about to tip. This was not it. The fortress still had depth. The Castellax were still fighting in coherent lines. The fists still moved with discipline rather than desperation. They were not about to break through. They were about to break. He saw one of the Dominators take a barrage of Mauler cannon fire squarely in the chest and go down, abdomen torn open, primary hearts pulped. He saw auxiliary survivors climb over the dying Terminator like a piece of terrain, firing wildly up at the walls before being cut down in turn. He saw Valkar, armor steaming, surge forward yet again, urging his men on as if he believed sheer will could fill the gaps where bodies were lacking. "Galen!" voxed one of the Tyranthicos, voice crackling. "We cannot hold this line. The machines are chewing us apart. We need to withdraw, regroup, find another angle, or we all die here." "We all die here either way," Dion answered. "The difference is whether we die for nothing." He looked at Valkar. The siege captain was screaming over the vox, words half drowned in static and the roar of weapons. "Advance, you bastards," Valkar bellowed. "Do you want the Primarch to see you falter? Do you want him to remember you as failures? This is our chance. We press. We press until the gates crack or our bones do." He ordered yet another cohort forward, into a gap that was not a gap at all but a kill zone under 3 overlapping lines of fire. Men went because he told them to. They died because reality did not care about his desperation. Dion made a choice. "Form on me," he voxed to the surviving Tyranthicos. "Now." There was no time for explanation. They moved anyway. Terminators angled in towards him from micro-engagements all along the breach line, breaking off from Castellax and fists they had been dueling. Within a handful of breaths, Dion had a knot of hulking figures around him, cataphractii plates scarred, weapons slick with the blood of friend and foe. He turned them towards Valkar. The siege captain did not see them at first. His focus was fixed ahead, on the superficial fractures in the gateway, on the wounded machines still fighting in his path, on the imagined image of Perturabo's face when he brought him victory. He roared another order, voice ragged. "Forward!" he screamed. "You will not shame me again. You will not shame this battalion in the eyes of our Gene Sire. You will not crawl back to the trenches with excuses in your mouths. You will die moving forward, or you will live knowing that I saw you." Dion reached him. He grabbed Valkar around the torso from behind, Thunderhammer dropping to hang from its mag clamp as he locked his gauntlets. Another Terminator seized Valkar's weapon arm. A third caught his legs, bracing. For a heartbeat, Valkar thought it was an enemy. He tried to twist, to bring his hammer up, to tear free. He might have succeeded against any other foe. Against 3 fully armored Tyranthicos, even a siege captain's strength was not enough. "What are you doing?" he roared over the vox, struggling like a trapped beast. "Release me. That is an order. I will have you flayed for this." "No," Dion said. "You will not." He hauled Valkar bodily back from the edge of the breach, armor grinding against armor. Bolter rounds sparked off their plates. A Castellax's volley sheared past so close, the air burned along Dion's cheek. He ignored it. The other Terminators formed a wedge around them, taking the hits, staggering, under the impacts, but remaining upright. "You are killing the battalion," Dion said, voice flat. "You are burning us down to feed your pride. There is no breakthrough here. There is only slaughter. We do not die to make your name sound sweeter in the Primarch's memory." "Traitors," Valkar spat, spittle flicked inside his helm. "Cowards, you would run, you would abandon the assault. You shame us worse than any failure at Fal." Dion tightened his hold until he felt Valkar's armor creak. "We will not run," he said. "We will hold the line as ordered. We will fight where our deaths have meaning. But we will not let you throw us away for nothing. If one of us must die for this, it is you." He signaled the rear. "Medici unit," he voxed. "Non-lethal containment. Siege Captain Valkar to be removed from the line by order of Tyranthicos command." It was not a formal order. He had no real authority to override Valkar, but the men hearing him had served with Dion as long as they had with the siege captain. They heard the truth in his tone. They obeyed. A cluster of medicus servitors and support troops slogged forward through the debris, shielding rigs and restraint harnesses clattering. Under the cover of the Tyranthicos, they slapped shock clamps onto Valkar's armor joints, overrode his maglocks, flooded his systems with paralytic jolt fields. His limbs seized. "You cannot do this," Valkar snarled. His voice had lost some of its force, edged now with something perilously close to fear. "The Primarch will have you torn apart. He will flay you for daring to lay a hand on his chosen." "If he does," Dion said, "then he does. Better that than die here knowing I allowed you to waste us all." They dragged Valkar from the breach line like a captured beast, his armor locked, his fury thrashing impotently through the Vox. Behind them, the assault faltered without its driving madness. The 33rd Grand Battalion did not break, but its forward motion slowed, then stopped, pressed back into a grudging, blood-soaked stalemate. The Castellax still advanced, step by relentless step. The fists still fought like stone come alive. The Cadmean citadel still stood. Hours later, under a sky turned bruise-purple by the constant smoke, Valkar knelt again. This time, it was on the cold floor of Perturabo's command chamber. The restraints had been removed. He had walked under his own power to the center of the room. Cataphractii gait stiff but steady. Blood and dust caked the seams of his armor. His thunderhammer had been taken from him. His gauntlets were empty. Around him, the iron circle loomed. The Domitar automata stood in a half ring, their hulking frames lit by the dim lumen glow. Their faces were impassive, iron masks carved into blank, pitiless expressions. Their weapons were not yet raised. They did not need to be. The promise of what would happen if they were was enough to make even seasoned warsmiths swallow. Gallan Dion stood at the edge of the chamber, helm at his side, watching with eyes that gave nothing away. Foryx, Falk, Harkor, Toromino, Kroger, all were present. None spoke. They watched their brother kneel before their Primarch and waited to see which lesson would be taught tonight. Perturabo rose from his chair. The hololithic mountain turned slowly behind him, the gate sector marked in angry red. The Primarch stepped down from the dais with measured tread, each footfall a dull, heavy sound. "Askari Valkar," he said. Valkar looked up. "My lord," he began. "You have achieved nothing," Perturabo said, his voice as calm as if he were reciting a tally. "You have spent a battalion and an elite formation to crack stone, and the stone still stands. You have disobeyed implicit doctrine. You have forced your men into futile death, and then you allowed yourself to be dragged from the line by those same men, because they judged you more dangerous to the Legion than the enemy in front of them." The words fell one by one, precise as counted blows. "Explain," Perturabo said. Valkar's mouth worked. Pride and terror and raw need warred across his features. "I sought to give you what you wanted," he said. "A breach, a proof. I thought if I pushed harder, if I gave more, if I showed you I would spend everything without hesitation, you would see that I understand what it is to be Iron Warriors." Silence. Perturabo's eyes did not blink. "Yes," he said at last. "You do understand. You understand only the spending. Not the return, not the yield. You are half of a formula, the waste half." He lifted his hand. The Domitar of the Iron Circle took a single step forward in perfect unison, their heavy feet slamming onto the stone as one. The impact made the chamber shudder. Servos whined as their massive arms flexed. Power built in their internal reactors, a low, hungry hum. Around the chamber, even hardened sons of the 4th Legion felt their gene-forged hearts stutter. When Perturabo called a man a failure, there was only one kind of correction. Valkar stared up at the approaching automata, eyes wide now, all masks stripped away. For the first time since Fal, he truly understood how small he was against the will that weighed him. The chamber filled with the echo of the Iron Circle's footsteps as they closed in. Judgment had not yet fallen, but it was coming, heavy as a hammer, inevitable as gravity. Valkar did not scream until the second blow. The first took his arm. The Domitar crashed forward with the sound of a collapsing foundry, its huge limbs pistoning. The iron fist came in low and sideways, faster than a thing that size had any right to move. Ceramite shattered. Armor and bone and flesh parted in a single, obscene burst. Valkar's left arm left his body in a bloom of blood and sparking cabling, the limb spinning away across the stone floor of the chamber. He stared at the stump in disbelief for a heartbeat. Then his gene-forged nerves caught up with reality, and the pain hit. He roared, a raw animal sound that shook the air. Perturabo watched from his throne, expression carved from basalt. The second blow took Valkar off his knees. Another Domitar stepped in, its hammer-like fist slamming down upon his shoulder and chest. Cataphractii plate buckled and tore. Ribs snapped like brittle twigs. The impact drove Valkar into the stone with such force that cracks spidered out from the point where his body met the floor. Blood sprayed, hot and bright, speckling the iron feet of the automata. Around the edges of the chamber, warsmiths and captains watched. Foryx, Falk, Harkor, Toromino, Kroger, Gal and Dion, still bearing the grime of the failed breach line. None of them looked away. That was a luxury they had never been allowed. When the Primarch corrected his sons, they were expected to witness the lesson. Ascari Valkar, Perturabo said, voice level. You were given a task. You failed to understand its parameters. You equated sacrifice with success. You mistook waste for will. This is treason against your purpose. Another strike, this one from above, both Domitar fists coming down together like a smith's hammer driving a spike. Valkar's chest collapsed. For a moment, through split ceramite, there was a glimpse of crushed organs and shattered ribcage, a mess of red and black and glistening white. The air filled with the smell of ruptured viscera and spilled coolant. He tried to speak. Blood bubbled from his mouth. Perturabo raised one hand, and the iron circle stepped back half a pace. They did not lower their arms. They did not disarm. They stood poised, waiting. Look at him, Perturabo said to the ring of officers. This is what becomes of a tool that strikes without measure, a hammer that sees every surface as a nail, a commander who knows only how to spend and never how to count. Valkar's remaining hand clawed at the air, fingers flexing uselessly. He would have thrown away every man under his command to scratch stone, Perturabo continued. He would have called it devotion. He would have called it loyalty. It is not. It is incompetence wearing the skin of zeal. No one spoke. No one moved. Remember this, Perturabo said. We are not the berserkers of the 12th. We are not the glory-hungry fools of the 3rd. We are the 4th. We measure. We calculate. We apply pressure until things break. We do not break ourselves against them out of vanity. He lowered his hand. The Domitar ripped Valkar apart. They did it methodically, each movement precise, each blow calculated to reduce rather than merely kill. One enormous hand closed around his thigh and tore the leg free in a spray of blood and torn ligaments. Another gripped his remaining arm and ripped it from the socket, shoulder and all. They took him apart as if dismantling a faulty engine, tearing pieces from the central mass, scattering them across the floor. Armor tore like foil under their fists. Flesh and bone became unrecognizable fragments. By the time they stepped back, panting vents gusting hot air, Valkar was no longer a man but a collection of bloody shards and twisted ceramite spread across several meters of stone. The smell in the chamber was a heavy, metallic reek that clung to the tongue. Perturabo looked down at what had been his son. Clear it, he said. Servitors shuffled forward, their blank faces expressionless. They began scooping the remains into waiting containers, mechadendrites whirring as they plucked up chunks of armor and meat alike. In minutes, what had been Ascari Valkar vanished into auger-marked storage drums, destined for recycling vats. The officers remained in place. Perturabo turned away from the mess, returning to the hololithic mount of Hydra Cordatus that hung in the air. "Valkars, command," he said. "The 33rd Grand Battalion, the Tyranthicos. His failure leaves us a gap. We will correct it." He gestured, and rune tags bloomed above the miniature fortress. "Foryx," he said. "Overall coordination of artillery and logistics remains yours. You will adjust our fire plans in light of what we have learned. No more grand hammer blows at the gates. No more concentration of assets that yield only casualties. We will unpick this fortress stone by stone." "Foryx acknowledged," the former first captain said, bowing his head slightly. His eyes never left the projections, cold, measuring, already recalculating. "Barb and Falk," Perturabo went on, "you remain as Triarch. The men look to you. You will oversee the integration of our revised doctrine. You will ensure that every warsmith under my banner understands the lesson of Valkar." Falk's hand twitched at his side. There was a hunger in his gaze, but it was banked deep. "As you command, Lord," he said. "Toromino," Perturabo said. "The auxiliaries and levied cohorts are yours. You will bleed them where necessary. You will not waste them where it is not. Bodies are abundant. Time is not." "Understood," Toromino replied, voice low. "Kroger," Perturabo said last. "The 23rd Grand Battalion has proved adaptable. You will fill the space Valkar leaves. When a hammer is required, you will be it." Kroger inclined his head, jaw tight. "I will not fail you, Lord," he said. Perturabo's eyes flicked to him, then away. "See that you do not," he said. The command structure settled like rearranged pieces in some vast, blood-slick puzzle. Alliances shifted, rivalries sharpened. Yet all of them bowed their heads to the same will. The new orders filtered down the trenches and dugouts of the valley. Men who had expected yet another massed assault at dawn found instead that they were being retasked to sapping work, to listening posts, to mine survey duty. Entire cohorts of artillery were given fresh firing patterns and told to concentrate on different sectors than before, to lay down not just raw damage, but carefully tuned harmonics. The siege changed character. The mad hammer blow against the gates gave way to a slow, systemic unpicking. Iron warriors' mining cadres pushed deeper into the earth, their augers and melter torches gnawing at the mountain's roots. They dug listening tunnels, narrow and choke-tight, where men sat in the dark with their ears pressed to rock, feeling for the faint tremors of Imperial mining in return. Countermines were plotted. Demolition chambers were seeded with charges and wired to distant triggers. Above ground, artillery shifted from blunt saturation to precise torment. Foryx's cogitator banks calculated patterns of fire that would not just damage the fortress, but harry its defenders' minds. Shells fell at irregular intervals, never enough to allow the garrison to predict a lull. Heavy rounds slammed into specific sections at carefully timed frequencies, setting up resonances in the living stone that made the entire citadel tremble, then fell silent, letting the defenders listen to grinding noises that might be structural failure or might be ghosts in the mineral flesh. Vox projectors were set up along the siege lines, their emitters angled towards the fortress. At random hours, they howled shrill feedback, or screamed inhuman war chants twisted from the 4th Legion's old battle hymns. Sometimes they broadcast nothing but the sounds of men dying in other battles. Archived recordings from distant campaigns piped into the Citadel's galleries, so that the people huddled within could not be sure whether the screams came from the valley outside or the corridors next door. The psychological warfare was as carefully measured as the artillery. "We will grind them," Foryx told Perturabo in one briefing. "Not just their walls, their will. We will make them doubt the strength of their stone long before it actually fails." Perturabo nodded once. "Do it," he said. Inside the Cadmean citadel, Cassander felt the change like a shift in the wind. The weight of the enemy's attention moved. The gate assaults did not cease entirely, but they became probes instead of hammer blows. The real pressure came from below, where the mountain's bones groaned, and from within the walls themselves, where certain sections began to vibrate constantly under carefully tuned bombardment. He stood in the strategium with his remaining officers, helm off, the air sour with stale sweat and recycled breath. "How many brothers fit for duty?" he asked. Locris did not need to consult a slate. 53 Astartes, he said. "Of the original 200. We can scrape perhaps 10 more who can still fire a bolter if we keep them off the walls and in reserve, but they cannot march or climb. They are held together by will and ceramite." "The army," Cassander said. "Fragmented," Locris said. "We have some solar auxiliar companies still largely intact. Chalcidian grenadiers mostly. The planetary defense regiments have been bled white. We count soldiers now in viable firing lines rather than in battalions. Thousands still, but exhausted. Ammunition is low. Food is lower. And the civilians," Cassander said. 13,000 in the inner levels," Locris replied. "No more. The rest?" He did not finish. He did not need to. Cassander nodded slowly. "Then we fight as if the outer ring is already lost," he said. "Full back lines, redoubts, choke points, room by room if we must. The citadel is not just walls and gates. It is corridors and stairs and choke chambers. We will turn every meter into a killing ground." He laid his hand on the stone of the table, feeling the faint shudder as another Iron Warrior's shell struck somewhere above. "We hold every level as long as we can," he said. "When we can no longer hold, we fall back and deny, demolish, collapse. We do not leave them open paths. We make them earn every breath of air they take within these halls." The Mechanicum adepts listened with their blank, lipless mouths pressed in thin lines. "We can assist," said one Magos, his voice a grating metallic whisper. "The Castellax maniples and stationary gun servitors can be reconfigured for corridor denial. We can program kill zones into the citadel's interior geometry." "Do it," Cassander said. "There is more," the Magos went on. "We can tie demolition charges into the structural nodes of certain sections. If overrun, we can trigger controlled collapses. Entire corridors, entire galleries can be shut, filled with rubble, buried. Anything within them will be crushed. Enemy, ally, refugee." His mechadendrites twitched, clicking in faint agitation. "It is inefficient to expend wards of the Omnissiah in such a manner," he said, "but it is more inefficient to allow the Iron Warriors unimpeded movement." Cassander looked at him. "We are the 7th, he said. "We do not waste lives where there is another choice. There is no other choice here. Set your charges. Program your servitors. If a gallery must be sacrificed, we sacrifice it." He caught the eyes of the solar auxiliar colonels in the room, the army officers whose men might one day find themselves ordered to hold a passage that they knew could be dropped on them at a word. "If it becomes necessary," he said, "I will be the one to give the order." In the lower levels, the Mechanicum set to work. Servitors lumbered through corridors, their augmetic limbs bearing demolition packs and bundles of cable. Tech priests cut recesses into the living stone and sank charges there, wiring them together, feeding the control nodes into their own noospheric networks. Gun servitors were bolted into alcoves that gave them fields of fire down intersecting passages, their weapon limbs ratcheted into permanent readiness. Castellax were assigned kill zones. The massive automata stood in shadowed vaults and at the mouths of key intersections, their weapons powered but idle, waiting for the coded signals that would unleash them. Their Cortex units were reprogrammed with simple instructions. Fire until movement ceases. If the enemy breaches Zone Aurelius, collapse ceiling. If the enemy breaches Zone Damaris, overcharge reactor. The valley outside reflected these grim preparations in its own way. Trench lines had begun as neat, angular works, the geometric expression of Iron Warrior's doctrine. By now, they had devolved into a warren, trenches merging, collapsing, being rebuilt, always closer to the mountain. The amount of dead the siege had produced had far outstripped the capacity for traditional burial. The 4th Legion adapted. Bodies of auxiliaries and condemned prisoners were dragged into the base of the earthworks, packed tight, layer upon layer, and covered with soil. The weight of marching boots and gun carriages pressed them down further, compressing flesh and bone into a nauseatingly elastic foundation. In some places, there was only a thin crust of dirt between the trench floor and the compacted charnel beneath. Men marching along the fire step could feel the give under their soles, a soft resistance that told them exactly what lay underfoot. Some of the dead were enemy soldiers retrieved from no man's land under cover of night. Others were their own. The earth did not care. The trenches grew. Their parapets, reinforced by sandbags filled with soil, stained a permanent rusty color, by planks laid over mounds that had finger bones sticking out where the wood did not quite cover. The smell in the valley was a constant, rot and cordite, latrine stench and the copper tang of blood, the acrid bite of propellant, the greasy smoke of burning promethium. Men stuffed rags under their helmets, soaked neck scarves in harsh chem solutions, anything to try and filter out the stink. It settled on tongues and in lungs despite every effort. In one of the deeper command bunkers, Barben Folk and Foryx stood over their own hololith, the mountain reflected in miniature between them. "We should mass," Folk said. "Take what remains of the grand battalions and hurl them in one final assault. Not like Valkar's madness, but coordinated, layered. Let the bulk of the Legion crash against the walls and break them by sheer momentum. I will lead it. I will stand in the breach and drag the 7th's dead from their own fortress." Foryx's mouth crooked in something that might have been disdain, or might have been the closest he came to amusement. "And how many of us would be left when you were done posturing amid the rubble?" he asked. "You would give Perturabo his victory, perhaps, and leave him, with nothing but slaves and automata to hold it." "We were not made to cower in trenches until we rot," Folk said. "We are iron warriors. We are the storm against the walls." "We are the hand that guides the storm," Foryx corrected. "You mistake the wind for the will that directs it. Our Primarch has already shown you what he does to hammers that swing without measure." He gestured at the hololith, where lines showed the progress of their mines and saps beneath the mountain. "We will bleed them through the earth," he said. "We have their stress points mapped. We have their air vents plotted. We know their ammunition dumps and their water recyclers. Another month of this pressure, and they will choke inside their stone coffin before we need to commit a single massed assault. Is that not more satisfying than throwing away cohorts just to see your name in a saga nobody will sing?" Folk's jaw clenched. "Another month," he repeated. "Do you see the state of our stocks, Foryx? Munitions are not infinite. Food rots. Human bodies exhaust. We are not a machine that can run forever on an empty hopper." From the far side of the bunker, Sultan Vulbron spoke. "The mountain will not last a month," the stone-wrought said. Both warsmiths turned. Vulbron stood with his scarred hands pressed flat to the bunker wall, eyes half closed. Dust streaked his face. His armor was caked with dried mud and stone powder from long hours spent in shafts and tunnels. He looked as though he had been carved from the same material he studied. "I can feel it," he said. "The rock, the way they have laced their fortress into it, the way our shells have shaken it, the way our mines have gnawed at its roots. The western approaches are clean, no enemy charges, no Imperial countermines. The stone there is fractured. One more proper blow, and it will shear." "You are certain," Foryx said. Vulbron nodded slowly. "I have walked in its bones," he said. "I have listened. The citadel is not just a thing of mineral and alien artifice. It is a structure of stress and counter-stress. We are close to the fulcrum. Press at the western gate again, not with Valkar's madness, but with planned, precise force, and the whole edifice will groan. Then we choose where it breaks." Perturabo, who had been silent at the back of the chamber, stepped forward. "You hear the stone," he said. Yes, Lord, Vulbron replied. Then we will act on what you hear, Perturabo said. Foryx, adjust your plans. We will continue to unpick and mine and saturate, but we will also prepare another blow at the west. Not yet, soon, when the figures balance. He turned his gaze to Folk. You will have your assault, he said, when I judge that their walls are hollow enough beneath the surface that a push will topple them. Not before. Until then, your hunger serves me best as a knife at the throats of your own men, to keep them sharp. Folk bowed his head, swallowing his frustration. Yes, Lord, he said. Not everyone in the Fourth accepted this cool calculus of patience. In a lesser dugout, lit by a single sputtering lumen strip, Harcourt sat on an ammunition crate, helmet cradled in his hands. His armor was daubed in fresh hazard stripes over older scars. Dried blood caked the vents of his rebreather. His eyes were bloodshot, rimmed in grime. Across from him, Kroger leaned against the wall, arms folded. They call you Scrapper, Kroger said. Harcourt's head snapped up. What? The fists, Kroger went on. On the walls. They name us the way we name our guns. You are Scrapper. Foryx is Voyeur. Falk is something forgettable. They did not give me a name yet. I suspect that will come after I have killed enough of them that they can no longer pretend I am just another lieutenant. He smiled, a tight, unpleasant twist of the lips. Scrapper, Harcourt repeated, tasting the word like poison. Because I dig, because I throw men into the dirt, because I fight where the ground is filthiest. Because they see you as blunt, Kroger said, as a tool that digs the trenches their shells fall into, as a claw, not a mind. Harcourt's fingers tightened on the rim of his helm. I have been given nothing since Valkar fell, he said. No glory, no spearheads, no chance to show what the 23rd can do outside a trench. Foryx and Falk carve up the real work between them, while Perturabo watches and measures and says nothing. I am left to scrape and scavenge. He spat on the floor. I am not a dog scratching at the door for scraps, he snarled. I will not be remembered as the warsmith who dug holes while others broke the fortress. If they will not give me a chance, I will take one. Kroger raised an eyebrow. Careful, he said. You saw what happens to those who mistake their own desire for our Primarch's will. I saw a fool who charged blind, Harcourt said. I am not Valkar. I do not intend to hurl myself against the same wall in the same way and call it courage. He leaned forward, lowering his voice despite the fact that they were alone. The northern approaches, he said, less watched, less mapped. The fists have their guns pointed west and south, where we have hammered and dug. The north face is steeper, treacherous. They think it's safe enough to ignore. We will prove them wrong. You mean to climb, Kroger said. Harcourt's grin showed his teeth. We mean to climb, he said. The 23rd will go where the mountain is cruelest. We will cut our own path. When we stand on those walls, when we tear down their banners and piss on their stone, Perturabo will have to see. There will be no denying who opened the way. And if he did not order it, Kroger said, if he judges your initiative as rebellion rather than resourcefulness, Harcourt shrugged. Then I will already have my hands around the throat of his enemy, he said. He can decide in that moment whether he prefers obedience or results. He slammed his helm back on, maglocks clamping. Get your men ready, Kroger, he said. When the time comes, I will want someone in the vanguard who understands how to survive a mistake. The lieutenant watched him go and said nothing. In the 4th Legion, ambition was as natural as breath. Whether it killed you or carried you higher was a matter of timing and the Primarch's mood. Above all these human calculations, the siege itself approached a breaking point. Ammunition stocks dwindled on both sides. Shell counts were revised downward. Fire missions that would once have been approved without thought were now questioned, weighed against what might be needed on some future, worse day. Men were issued fewer rounds, fewer grenades, fewer replacement parts for weapons that had been firing almost without pause for months. Inside the Cadmean citadel, The walls and guns failed faster than they could be repaired. The living stone still flowed, but sluggish now, thick and reluctant. Each new impact opened cracks that did not fully close. Some bastions had been reduced to stumps, their upper levels shattered, their gun emplacements knocked out and not replaced. The air in the inner galleries grew thinner as systems aged faster than any schedule had predicted. In the Imperial Fist's councils, men spoke less of if the enemy would breach and more of when. "We can hold them a while longer," Locrist said one night, helm off, eyes ringed with exhaustion. "But not forever. The guns will die, the walls will fail, the men will break." Cassander nodded. "Then we plan for after the breach," he said. "We shape the interior battle so that even in losing the walls we bleed them dry." In Iron Warrior's bunkers, similar truths were voiced from the other side. "Our projections show that if the siege continues at this current tempo, we will reach a point where each meter of ground costs more shells and men than we can replenish," Foryx said to Perturabo. "We must either find a way to accelerate the fortress's collapse, or accept that the entire operation becomes a net loss for the Legion." Perturabo's eyes were on the hololith, on the microfractures Vulbronze runes marked along the western approaches, on the steeper lines of the northern faces, where no guns yet concentrated. "We will accelerate," he said. "We are close. I can feel it in the numbers, in the stone. One more turn of the screw, one more application of pressure at the right point. Then the citadel will crack." He looked up, and in that moment it seemed as though he could see through earth and smoke and armor and flesh alike, to the hearts of the men fighting and dying on either side. "Prepare," he said. "The storm is coming. When it breaks, there will be very few left to see the sky afterward." In the Valley of Bones, and in the stone-choked galleries, men checked weapons and counted ammunition, and tried not to think about graves. The siege had been a slow bleed. All of them, Iron Warrior and Imperial Fist and Mortal Soldier alike, understood now that the next phase would not be slow at all. It would be a single, murderous exhalation, and then silence. Dawn came as a dim bruise on the sky, a smear of dirty light behind the smoke. In the trenches, men woke from shallow, armor-clad sleep to the old chorus of the valley, the crack of distant gunfire, the cough of engines, the low thunder of artillery walking its habitual paths against the mountain. Ash drifted down in soft grey sheets. The mountain loomed, its fortress crown half shrouded in a halo of dust. On the northern flank, the guns were quiet. Harcourt took that silence as invitation. He stood on the lip of the foremost trench, helmet cradled, in the crook of one arm, cold air scraping at the scars on his face. The northern slope of the Cadmean mountain rose before him in a jagged rush of stone, steeper and more treacherous than the western and southern approaches, its faces scored by ancient rockfalls and newer bombardment. The fortress walls here were less studded with visible weaponry, their angles more awkward. A natural barrier, the fists had judged, a lesser priority. Harcourt saw a ladder. 23rd Grand Battalion, he voxed, his voice rolling down the channels like an artillery blast. "Scrapper speaks. This is our climb. We go now, before the cowards at the guns change their minds." Around him, Iron Warriors rose from cover. Walker-mounted assault platforms stomped forward, their piston legs hissing, broad backs bristling with gantries and harness points. Legionaries clamped themselves to the frames, mag boots locking onto iron plates, chains and safety lines rattling as they secured. Human auxiliaries swarmed at the walkers' feet, loaded down with ropes, breaching tools, demolition packs. Harcourt's own command squad formed a knot around him, plate still streaked with the grime of the last assault they had been deemed too unimportant to lead. Behind them, the trench line thrummed with unease. This attack had not come from Foryx's carefully coded orders, or Folk's shouted ambitions in the command bunker. It had not rolled out beneath the clarifying scrutiny of the Primarch's gaze. It had come from Scrapper, from the warsmith who had spent the siege digging holes and being mocked for it by enemies who knew him only by that work. "Guns are not ready," came a cautious voice over the vox, some artillery officer further back along the lines. "We have not prepped the slopes, Lord. We are still recalibrating after the last barrage. We will be blind to you up there." "Good," Harcourt said, locking his helm into place with a click. His voice came out of the grill as a rasping growl. "I do not want your shells. I want your silence. Stay out of my way." He climbed the nearest walker platform in 3 strides, boot magnets clamping, gauntlets slapping down on the safety rail. The machine lurched forward as its pilot heard the command through the link and obeyed. "Scrapper," came another voice. Kroger. "Is this sanctioned?" Harcourt laughed, a harsh electronic bark. "It will be," he said. "When Perturabo sees us on the wall, it will be." The walker shuddered into motion, leading the little herd of clanking platforms and running infantry towards the northern slope. Above, in the Cadmean citadel, the northern parapets were quiet. Cassander stood with Locris and Castor on a battered bastion that overlooked the western approaches. The sky there was dirty with smoke trails and shell bursts. The distant trenches were familiar scars, their outlines burned into the captain's memory over long months. He had grown used to the pattern of the siege. Digger gnawed up from the south with his careful saps. Voyeur's guns on the western flank watched, waited, then spoke with surgical cruelty. Malingerer's half-hearted works to the east advanced only enough to keep up the pretense of effort. Scrapper's madness had been blunted at the gates. His grand assault bled into the stone. There was a kind of rhythm to it now, a murderous, grinding rhythm, but a rhythm all the same. This morning, the tune changed. "Movement on the north face," Castor said, helm lenses narrowing. "Heavy, close, climbing formations." Cassander turned, looking past the shattered silhouette of the northern bastions. Ash haze clung to the slope there, but his helm augers picked out shapes within it. Walker silhouettes, multi-legged, thrusting up the incline. Smaller forms clinging to their sides like parasites. Dust plumes from running infantry at their feet. "No preparatory bombardment," Locris said. "No probing, fire. Just advance." "That is not Digger," Castor said. "It is Scrapper," Cassander murmured. "He has found a new wall to throw himself at." He watched for another moment, measuring. The attack was reckless, ill-prepared, launched ahead of any coordinated gun plan. It came from a place of anger, of bruised pride, not the cold arithmetic that usually characterized the Fourth. It was, in its way, a gift. "How many charges do we have buried on that face?" Cassander asked. Locris did not hesitate. "Enough," he said. "Then we spring the trap," Cassander said. "Before Foryx can call him back, before the Primarch can decide this sudden enthusiasm serves his purpose, bring down the slope." On the northern internal levels of the citadel, deep within the stone, rows of demolition runes glowed in Mechanicum script. Magi and tech adepts had sunk charges into the mountain itself weeks before, knowing that there might come a day when denying an entire flank would be worth the expense. Locris keyed the codes. Deep within the rock, fusion-shaped charges awoke. Their machine spirits screamed brief, ecstatic hymns, and then they tore themselves apart. The mountain convulsed. Auxiliaries on the lower slopes felt it as a tremor under their boots, a sudden shiver that rattled teeth and made gravel dance. The walkers' legs splayed to keep their balance, pistons hissing as they tried to compensate. Harcourt, clinging to his gantry, looked up in time to see fissures crack across the slope above, like spiderwebs of black on grey. Then 300 meters of the mountainside let go. Entire bands of stone peeled away from the core, slabs the size of city blocks, sliding as if some gigantic hand had nudged them. Loose rock and debris went with them. The world turned into motion, the slope becoming a grinding, roaring tide of boulders and dust. It hit the climbing formations like an ocean of knives. Walkers vanished, their forms swallowed by the cascade. One moment, Harcourt could see the broad back of the platform ahead of him. The next, it was gone, engulfed in a lunging wall of stone that crushed iron legs like twigs and shredded the legionaries clinging to its frame. Men became red mist between colliding boulders. Auxiliary bodies bounced like rags, flung into the air and dashed against the shifting slope. Harcourt's own walker lurched as the ground tried to slide out from under it. The pilot fought the controls, pistons digging for purchase. Stone dropped away to their right, a sudden empty space where a chunk of mountain had simply fallen, revealing a sheer drop beneath. "Hold!" Harcourt roared. "Hold, you wretched machine!" The walker skidded, one leg sliding out over the void, then found a new brace point as falling rock wedged under it. The platform tilted sickeningly, throwing men from its sides. Harcourt dug his mag boots in and grabbed a safety chain with one hand, armor growling in protest. Below, the avalanche washed over the lower slopes in a thunder of grinding stone. Hundreds of iron warriors and thousands of human bodies vanished beneath it. Trenches that had been cut into the northern approaches were obliterated, filled in an instant as the slumping mountain carved a new profile for itself. Earthworks that had taken weeks of backbreaking labor to create simply ceased to exist, hammered flat, even as they and the men in them were folded into the moving mass. From the walls, Imperial fists watched in silence. "That cost them dearly," Castor said. "That cost us a flank," Locris replied. "We have remade the battlefield." Cassander said nothing. He watched the dust boil up, swallowing the details. Ruthlessness was not cruelty for its own sake. It was simply the understanding that sometimes the correct move smelled of blood and buried men. The 7th Legion had always been willing to make such moves. "Any sign of the Primarch?" Locris asked. "Not yet," Cassander said. "But he will see this. He sees everything. For now, we deal with the survivors." Because there were survivors. Some walkers had ridden the avalanche rather than been broken by it, their legs skating and skidding on the rolling stone until they slammed into a new position and stuck. Some legionaries had leapt clear at just the right moment, mag boots latching onto freshly exposed rock faces. Some auxiliaries, by blind luck and vicious instinct, had found hollows and ridges that shielded them from the worst of the rockfall. Those who lived reformed. "Up!" Harcourt snarled into the Vox, hauling himself upright as the walker lurched to a halt in a cloud of dust. His head rang. Warning runes danced in his helm, systems complaining about stress fractures and compromised power feeds. He ignored them. He looked up and saw the citadel looming closer now, its walls rearing above them, pitted and scarred, but still immense. The northern face had changed, the avalanche, cutting a new ramp of debris into its flank. Above, gun muzzles were only just beginning to rotate towards this unexpected threat. "We are not done," he said. "Not by half. We climb. 23rd Grand Battalion, advance and ascend. The mountain will not bury us. We will bury it with our bones." The survivors obeyed. They abandoned damaged walkers and swarmed up the new slope, hands and boots scrabbling for purchase on the unstable mix of rock and bodies. Lasfire and bolter shot raked down from the walls as the fortress's gunners recovered. Men died, tumbling backwards down the incline, crashing into their comrades and carrying them away like stones jarred loose. The Cadmean citadel awakened its more insidious defenses. Gravity fields, dormant along the northern approaches, flared into life as Mechanicum adepts and fortress machine spirits responded. The weight on the climbing men doubled, then trebled. Armor that weighed like a second skin a moment before became a crushing shell. Joints screamed, servo motors whined at the edge of failure. Iron warriors grunted under the increased load, teeth bared, pushing on. Auxiliaries in lighter gear were simply pressed flat to the slope, limbs pinned, ribs cracking as if an invisible giant had decided to lean on them. Some tried to crawl, dragging themselves hand over hand, until their hearts burst in their chests. The living stone added its familiar cruelty. Spines erupted from sections of wall, where men found temporary purchase, lancing through palms and feet, skewering arms and thighs. Cavities yawned open, swallowing clusters of climbers, snapping shut again with wet crunches. Dust mixed with blood, turning the air into a choking, iron-tasting fog. Kroger climbed through it. He had gathered his assault group in the chaos after the avalanche, barking names into the vox, pulling together those he trusted to keep moving when everything turned worse. Vortrax, he had said. Ushtor, Ren, Havel. With me. They answered. Armor pushed beyond recommended tolerances, plate scarred, voices steady. Now they hauled themselves up the shifting debris field like beasts made for this hell. Bolters slung, chainswords clipped to their belts. They needed their hands to climb. Shots from above sparked off their pauldrons, chewing at their plate. Each impact threatened to dislodge them and send them tumbling. Vortrax reached a jut of stone and flattened himself against it. One hand braced, the other reaching down to haul Kroger up. A moment later, his helm exploded, a heavy caliber round punching through the side of his skull, turning the interior into a red mist that sprayed across Kroger's faceplate. Vortrax's body spasmed, fingers clamping unintentionally, then letting go. He fell backwards, armor tumbling, bouncing off outcrops, smashing into men below. Ushtor made it 3 handholds higher before a gravity spike flared under his boots. The sudden increase in force ripped muscles and tendons. His knees snapped backwards. Ligaments tore. He roared, hauling himself forward with his arms alone, arms bulging under his armor. A spine erupted from the stone, punching through his abdomen, lifting him clear off the slope. He hung there for a moment, impaled, bolter dangling from its sling. Then the wall swallowed him. Kroger did not stop. Every loss was a note in the constant Iron Warrior's litany. This one is gone. That one failed to keep pace. Their absence left more room on the slope for those who could endure. He smashed his fist into a section of mineral flesh that grew too smooth, cracking it, finding purchase in the fracture lines. He jammed his boot into a crevice, ignoring the way the gravity field made his joints grind like overstrained gears. His heart's hammered in his chest, pumping gene-forged blood through vessels that felt too tight. Above him, the parapet loomed, close enough now that he could see the outlines of Imperial fists. Moving along it, yellow armor stark against the stone. Almost there, he voxed to the few remaining members of his group. Do not die before you see the top. That would be wasteful. A bolter round struck his shoulder pad, spinning him. He lost his grip with one hand, fingers scraping at the stone. For a moment he hung by one arm, legs kicking, the whole weight of his armor threatening to tear his arm from its socket. He snarled and flung himself sideways, shifting his center of mass, slamming his boot into another edge. Pain flared as something tore in his shoulder, but his hand held. He dragged himself up the last few meters by sheer force of will. The world narrowed to the next handhold, the next ledge, the next breath. He did not think of Perturaba watching. He did not think of Harkor's ambition. He thought only of the wall in front of him, and the need to put himself on the other side of it. He reached the parapet edge and hauled himself over. The top of the citadel was a storm of close-quarter murder. Imperial fists met the first climbers in a line of bolter fire and whirring blades. Chainswords hacked down, biting into Iron Warriors as they crested the parapet, chewing through armor joints, sending limbs spinning away in arcs of blood. Bolt rounds fired almost point-blank punched through chest plates, detonating inside bodies, turning rib cages into jagged shrapnel that blew out backs. Kroger rolled onto the parapet and came up swinging. His bolter spat mass-reactive shells into the gut of the first fist he saw. The yellow-armored warrior folded around the impacts, armor buckling, then came on anyway, chainsword raised. Kroger met the incoming blade with his own, teeth slamming together, sparks flying where every jagged tooth met its opposite. The two Astartes shoved against one another, boots grinding on the stone, armor scraping. Kroger twisted, turning his weight into the lock. The fist overbalanced, and Kroger drove his shoulder into the other's chest, sending him staggering. A shot from a third party took the Imperial fist through the helm, snapping his head back. Kroger did not look to see who had fired. He stepped past the falling body and into the press. The parapet became a place where the scale of war collapsed down to the span of a man's reach. Astartes hammered each other into the stone. Fists cracked helms. Blades bit through ceramite and into flesh, leaving gashes that sprayed arterial blood in high arcs. Men were hurled from the walls, armor ringing as they fell, limbs flailing. Some hit lower ledges. Some fell all the way to the shattered slopes below, vanishing into the debris like stones into water. Cassander moved through it like a fragment of the fortress itself given purpose. The captain of the 42nd Company cut down an iron warrior with a precise sequence of strikes, chainsword carving along the seam of the traitor's pauldron, then biting into the gap under the arm, then taking the head as the other staggered. He stepped aside as a bolter shell flashed past, then stepped in again, boot crashing into a second enemy's knee, forcing it to buckle, blade coming down to finish the job. His armor was scorched and gouged. The fist on his shoulder plate was blackened by ash. His movements were slower than they had been months ago, his muscles burning with exhaustion, but every strike still counted. Locris and Castor fought at his flanks, keeping the press from closing around him entirely. The northern parapets were not designed for this kind of melee. They had been built as firing platforms, galleries for disciplined ranks of guns. Now they were slick with blood, littered with bodies. The living stone tried to repair damage underfoot, but there was too much fluid soaking into its pores, too many impacts. It bulged and sagged in places, making footing treacherous. Kroger saw the fist captain in the chaos. He recognized the way other defenders gravitated towards him, the brief orientation in the lines when he raised his blade or shouted an order. Figures like that were fulcrums. Break them, and the structure around them faltered. He forced his way towards Cassander, shouldering aside friend and foe alike when necessary. A Castellax loomed ahead, its Mauler cannon swiveling, optics flaring. Kroger ducked under a blast that flayed a trench in the parapet. Stone and bodies vaporized. He slammed his shoulder into the automaton's leg, knocking it off balance just enough that its next shot went wild and blew the head off an iron warrior at his back instead of cutting him in half. Cassander saw him coming. Their eyes met across a tangle of dying men, yellow and iron, duty and defiance. They crashed together. Kroger's first swing met Cassander's chainsword, the teeth clashing, weapons shrieking. The fist stepped in, inside the arc of Kroger's blade, and drove an elbow up, catching Kroger under the chin. The iron. Warrior's helm rang. Stars burst across his vision. He tasted blood. He responded with a headbutt, ramming his helm forward into Cassander's face. Ceramite cracked. The fist staggered, helm lenses crazed with fractures. Kroger pressed, driving his weight forward, trying to force his opponent back towards the parapet edge. Cassander shifted his stance, absorbing the force, then shoved, using the momentum against Kroger. The Iron Warrior felt his heel skid on stone made slick with gore. For a heartbeat, he teetered. A bolt round hit Cassander in the chest. It came from somewhere to Kroger's right, some Iron Warrior seeing an opportunity, not caring that his commander was in the way. The mass-reactive shell punched into the fist's breastplate and detonated, blowing out a crater of iron and flesh. Cassander jerked, breath knocked from his lungs, armor alarms shrieking. A second shot took him in the side of the helm. The round did not penetrate fully, but it spiderwebbed, the plasteel cracking lenses, flooding his vision with static. He dropped to one knee. For a moment, the parapet seemed to sway around him. Sound turned to a muffled roar. His heart pounded in his chest, out of sync. He tried to rise. Kroger, half off balance himself, made the decision a siege fighter always made when presented with a wounded wall. He stepped in and swung. His chainsword bit into Cassander's pauldron and shoulder, chewing at damaged ceramite. It did not take the arm off, but it dug deep, lodging in the armor. He wrenched, trying to tear through, but the weapon snagged. Reinforcing fists poured fire into the knot of iron warriors around their captain. Bolter rounds hammered into Kroger's front, smashing his weapon, blowing the chainsword apart in a burst of ruined teeth and twisted metal that shredded his hand. A shell took him in the upper arm, snapping bone, armor splintering. Pain flared white. His right limb went dead, hanging from torn tendons and frayed cabling. He fell backwards, stumbling, his feet slipping in blood. The parapet's edge loomed at his heel. He flung his left hand out, fingers clawing, and caught the ragged line of the battlement. He hung there, one-armed, half-blind, armor screaming warnings. Below, the northern face of the mountain dropped away in a chaos of rock and bodies. The gravity field still dragged. Letting go would mean not just a fall, but a fall under increased force. Bones and plates smashed to paste before he hit the ground. He refused. He dug his fingers into the broken stone, feeling them crack, the strain pulling at muscles all along his back. His breathing turned harsh, ragged. The world narrowed to that one point of contact. Around him, the fight shifted again. A new sound joined the cacophony. Stormbird engines. The gunship came in low over the northern approach, its hull marked with the colours of the 4th, its silhouette a predatory shadow against the hazy sky. Its engines roared as it flared for landing, their wash slamming down onto the parapet. Men died under that wind. Auxiliaries and Astartes alike were hurled from the walls, torn from their feet, smashed against bastion faces. Loose bodies were flung like broken dolls. Dust and grit became a flensing storm that scoured exposed flesh and battered armor. Weakened sections of parapet crumbled under the force, sending fresh cascades of debris tumbling down the slope. The Stormbird's ramp crashed down. Perturabo strode from the gunship with the iron circle at his back. The Primarch of the 4th Legion hit the parapet like a falling star. Forgebreaker rested in his grasp, its head a block of destruction that had cracked worlds. His armor of iron and brass and hazard stripe seemed to drink in the weak dawn light. His eyes burned molten gold. Imperial fists turned their guns on him. Bolter fire pattered against his plate like rain on a fortress wall. Grenades exploded at his feet, shrapnel clattering off his greaves. A Castellax swung its mauler cannon towards him, optics blazing. Perturabo moved. Forgebreaker came down once, smashing into the automaton's chest. The weapon's head flared, energy discharges crawling across its surface. The Castellax's torso imploded, armor plates crumpling inward, internal systems collapsing. The machine fell back in 2 pieces, smoke and oil gushing from the ruin. He stepped through the wreckage into the nearest knot of fists. His first backhand swing caught an Astartes mid-torso, snapping the warrior in half, upper body torn from lower in a spray of blood and viscera. The second took another in the helm, pulping head and neck, sending the broken body spinning through the air. He planted his boot on a third, pinning the struggling legionary to the stone, and brought Forgebreaker down, crushing armor and flesh and the living stone beneath into a single crater. The iron circle followed. The Domitar automata waded into the defenders, their own fists and built-in hammers rising and falling with mechanical precision. They grabbed Imperial fists and simply tore them apart, ripping limbs from sockets, pulling torsos open. Astartes, who had held the wall against months of siege, died in seconds. Lives ended under blows, delivered with all the emotion of a foundry stamping process. Cassander tried to rise again. His vision was a mess of cracks and static. He could hear the screams, the impact of something massive striking stone, the sudden, subtle shift in the fortress's tone, like a wounded animal's first whimper. He tasted blood in his mouth, copper and acid. He pushed himself up on one knee, chainsword hanging twitching at his side, and saw Perturabo. The Primarch saw him in turn. For a moment, their gazes met across the chaos. Captain and Genesire of another legion, defender and besieger, stone and iron. Perturabo raised Forgebreaker. A bolt of pain lashed through Cassander's chest as his ruined armor shifted. His legs refused to obey his command to move. He had enough strength left to straighten his back, to face the incoming blow with his helm tilted high. Forgebreaker did not descend on him. A section of parapet to his left exploded as the hammer struck, sending shards of stone and bodies spinning. The shockwave knocked Cassander sideways. Something heavy hit him, driving him to the ground. The world flickered, then went black. Perturabo turned away from the unconscious fist and towards the wall itself. The Cadmean citadel had been a challenge whispered in his ear since Dorn had first taken it. An ancient fortress, self-repairing, self-defending, smug in its apparent invincibility. An insult of stone. He planted his feet. He lifted Forgebreaker in both hands. He drove the hammer's head into the ramparts with all the force of his transhuman frame and all the weight of the siege behind him. The impact was not a sound so much as a statement. It boomed through the fortress, through the mountain, through the bones of every living thing nearby. Shockwaves radiated from the point of contact, visible ripples in the stone. Cracks jumped outward, branching like lightning. The living mineral under his feet flared with sickly light as the alien systems within it tried to absorb, to compensate, to heal. Perturabo hit it again and again. Each strike carried not just raw force, but carefully tuned, viciously calculated frequencies. The Primarch knew stone. He knew stress and load and failure. He had learned the Citadel's resonant tones through months of bombardment and Vulbron's whispered insights. Now he played those tones through Forgebreaker, hammering them into the structure. The Citadel screamed, not a sound in the air, but a shriek in the bones. Men within its walls staggered, hands clapped to their ears, teeth vibrating in their jaws. The living stone's attempts at repair faltered completely. Instead of flowing to knit, cracks it seemed to seize, to crystallize in the moment of its own breaking. Inside the fortress, corridors twisted, walls buckled, bulging inward or outward without warning. Ceilings sagged, then dropped, crushing those beneath. Galleries warped, their floors suddenly sloping, sending men and machinery sliding into newly opened chasms. Sections that had been stable moments before turned into traps as the internal stresses Perturabo had carefully built up over the siege finally roared free. Demolition charges the Mechanicum had laid flared prematurely as circuits broke, adding man-made detonations to the natural collapse. Fire raced along ruptured conduits. Air howled as pressure equalized through torn vents. From the valley, Iron Warriors watched the Cadmean citadel change shape. Bastions leaned, towers cracked, whole slices of walls slid, dropping in slow, majestic collapses that still killed every living thing upon them. Dust plumes burst outwards as sections of the mountain skin sloughed away. For a heartbeat, the fortress looked less like a constructed work, and more like some titanic beast taking its last, shuddering breaths. Kroger, still clinging to the parapet edge, felt the stone move under his fingers. The crack running just beyond his grasp widened. The chunk of battlement he held onto tore itself free from the wall, beginning to tilt outwards. For a moment, his world lurched as gravity, already treacherous here, shifted. He hauled himself up with a snarl, every muscle in his body shrieking, and rolled onto more solid stone just as the section he had been hanging from tore free and fell, taking a swathe of defenders and attackers alike with it. He lay there, armor ruined, one arm useless, blood filling his mouth, and watched the fortress die. The Cadmean citadel, pride of Hydra Cordatus, symbol of the seventh, ancient relic of a forgotten age, was no longer an unassailable wall. It was a wounded animal, its armor cracked, its innards exposed in glimpses of twisted corridors and tumbling bodies. Its own mass turned against it, momentum pulling broken sections down, crushing those below. Iron Warriors in the valley stared up at the collapsing wall and saw not a fortress, but meat ready to be opened. The Cadmean citadel died screaming. Its cry was not a sound in the air, but a grinding shudder through stone and steel and flesh. Men felt it in their teeth and their bones as walls split and towers sagged. The mountain shook, shedding centuries of patient shape in a single convulsion. Dust geysered skyward. Gun positions tore loose from their mountings. Galleries that had once felt eternal shifted underfoot like the deck of a sinking ship. Perturabo stood amid the ruin he had made and raised his hammer. "Now," he said. The word carried down the Voxnet, into every dugout and trench, into the ears of warsmiths and artillery officers and auxiliary overseers. It was like the pulling of a final pin, in some vast, intricate device. General assault. Iron warriors swarmed. From the western trenches, from the southern saps, from fresh cuts in the earth under the sagging northern face, the 4th Legion and its human thralls poured towards the wounded fortress. They came through shattered gates and over tumbled wall sections, through breaches forced by months of bombardment and by the Primarch's own hand. Artillery fell silent, the guns holding their breath as the infantry moved into the space their shells had prepared. The only fire now was direct. Tank cannon smashing at still-standing bastions, heavy bolters strafe, cutting at parapets where defenders still clung, Lascanon stabbing at the last functioning towers. The Cadmean citadel tried to answer. Some macro batteries still spat defiance, hurling shells down into the advancing lines. A few of the gravity traps along the lower slopes flared spitefully, dragging men to their knees as they ran, pinning them to the ground, for the moments it took for the avalanche of their comrades to trample them into the soil. A handful of defense lasers, buried deep in the stone, lanced out in ragged, misaligned bursts, scything through spearheads and leaving neat, glassy channels in the debris. Then their power feeds failed. Conduits ruptured. The living stone choked on its own fractures. One by one, the citadel's teeth broke. Iron warriors entered the corpse. At the forefront, squads in iron and hazard stripe pushed into the first sundered galleries, bolters bucking, chain blades whining. Behind them came auxiliary cohorts, pressed into the gaps, shields up, laserguns strobed. Mechanized formations crawled over collapsed gates, their tracks grinding on broken stone and broken bodies alike. Resistance came in knots and flares. An Imperial Army heavy weapon team, dug in behind a fallen column, held a corridor junction long enough to gut 3 spearhead squads before a warsmith ordered the entire section flooded, with promethium and set alight. A Castellax, cut off from its handlers, went rogue in a stairwell, its cortex cycling through attack protocols with no external guidance. It slaughtered everything around it, loyalist and traitor, until an Iron Warrior sergeant hurled a melter charge under its torso and reduced it to half-melted scrap. The Citadel's internal defense cogitators triggered kill locks at random, bulkhead doors slamming shut, cutting squads off from each other. Iron Warriors simply blasted through them or planted breaching charges on their frames. The living stone tried one last trick, opening hungry voids beneath incautious boots, but even that instinct was failing. Some of the pits snapped shut on nothing. Some yawned and stayed open, edges crumbling, leading down into darkness, choked with dust and the screams of those already fallen. Within that collapsing labyrinth, Cassander fought his last war. He had woken in darkness to the sound of stone breaking and men dying. For a moment, he had thought himself buried, entombed in the mountain he had sworn to hold. Pain flared in his chest and shoulder, a raw tearing burn where armor and flesh had been opened. Hands had dug him from a drift of debris. "Lord," Locris had said, helm lenses bright against the gloom. "The walls are gone. The Primarch is on the parapets. We have lost the outer galleries. We fall back now, or we die here for nothing." Cassander had coughed blood, tasted stone dust and copper, and pushed himself upright. "Then we fall back," he had said, "to where dying means something." Now he moved through the inner halls with the last of his brothers at his back. Fewer than 60 Imperial fists remained upright and armed. Some limped, some held weapons in hands that trembled from blood loss and exhaustion. Their armor was a patchwork of repairs and scars, yellow plate stained black and rust red. With them marched Solar Auxilia Grenadiers and ragged lines of planetary militia their numbers thinned to shadows of their former strength. They fell back from one prepared line to the next. At the first inner choke point, they made the Iron Warriors pay in blood. Cassander had chosen that corridor himself, marking its angles, its length, the way it bent around a support pillar thick as a titan's leg. Gun servitors and castellax stood in alcoves, their weapons already slewed to cover the approaches. Demolition charges were sunk into the ceiling and walls, their detonators wired to Mechanicum command relays. When the Iron Warriors came, they came in force. Iron boots hammered on the stone. Hazard-striped armor flickered in the half-light. A heavy shield line formed at the fore, scuffed but solid, plating overlapping, bolters braced over the top. Auxiliaries poured in behind, weapons ready to fire over their masters' shoulders. The defenders opened up. Mauler cannon hammered into the front ranks, rounds turning shields and the men, behind them, into chunks of flying debris. Heavy lasfire from the Chalcidians burned through armor joints and eye lenses. Bolters from the fists laid down short, precise bursts that took Iron Warriors off their feet and slammed them into those behind. The corridor became a tube of sound and light and blood. Bodies piled. The attackers clambered over their own dead, firing as they came. Their advance slowed to a crawl by the sheer mass of corpses underfoot. They fired back, shots raking the defensive positions, punching holes in servitor skulls, tearing limbs from mortals, chipping and cracking the fist's already tortured plate. When the press threatened to surge through, the Mechanicum triggered the charges. The ceiling fell. Stone blocks, some the size of vehicles, tore free and dropped, crushing everything beneath. Imperial fists and Iron Warriors vanished under the cascade. Auxiliary bodies were pulped into paste in an instant. The floor heaved as the weight slammed down. Dust blasted through the choking confines. When it cleared, the corridor was clogged with rubble and broken limbs. "Next line," Cassander said, voice rough over the vox. "Fall back. Make them do it again." They did. At each prepared redoubt, each choke chamber, each kill zone the Castellax had been assigned. The last of the 42nd Company and their allies turned the citadel's insides into a maze of murder. They sealed doors behind them and opened bulkheads above their enemies. They collapsed stairwells, dropped floors, vented pressure. They fought in bunkers and junctions, in shrine naves now filled with corpse stacks instead of candles, in manufactorium halls where conveyor belts still bore rusting, half-finished components even as they were used as cover. They did not retreat in panic. They withdrew with the raptor poise of the 7th, trading space for blood. For a while, it almost seemed as if they could bleed the assault white before it reached the core. But there were too many Iron Warriors, too many auxiliaries, too much momentum. In one corridor, a Castellax expended every round in its magazines and still could not stop the tide. Iron Warriors smashed into it with chain fists and melter charges, tearing the machine apart, even as it pounded 3 more of them into paste with its heavy fists. The resultant wreckage blocked the passage as well as any deliberate collapse would have, but there were other routes. There were always other routes now that the Citadel's internal logic had been broken. In a shrine, Cassander watched an auxilia line break when a Domitar of the Iron Circle shouldered its way through the wall, stone and dust exploding around it. The giant automaton waded into the grenadiers, hammer arms rising and falling. Men died in clumps, bodies thrown across the altar steps, armor crumpling like tin. Cassander met the machine with a bellow and a 2-handed blow, his chainsword screeching as it chewed at the heavy plating of its joint. It bought seconds. Enough for some of his men to fall back through the side exit, enough for a Mechanicum adept to slam his hand down on a rune that detonated the hidden charges beneath the shrine floor. The explosion took Domitar and defenders alike. In the end, the retreats ran out. The 42nd Company made its last stand in a cluster of inner vaults where the Citadel's power cores and main data repositories had once been centered. Now the chambers were cracked, cables hanging in severed bundles from the ceiling, coolant pooled on the floor. Cassander counted his brothers. Fewer than 30 now. 10 maybe 15 more still breathing, but beyond any hope of standing. Some lay propped against the walls, bolters braced on their thighs, determined to fire until their hands failed. "Lord," Locrist said. Cassander turned. "You should fall back to the deepest sanctum," his lieutenant said. "We can hold them here, buy you time. You have led this garrison as Dorn would have wished. Your survival has value." Cassander looked at the shattered doors, the sagging stone, the trickle of dust that fell with each distant detonation. "A garrison is dead the moment a siege begins," he said. "There is no sanctuary, only positions not yet overrun. I will die where my failure is closest to being corrected." Locrist nodded once. "Then we die with you," he said. The Iron Warriors came. They breached the vault doors with melter cutters, slagging the metal into glowing slag that ran like slow molten waterfalls. They punched through the cracked stone with breaching charges and brute force. The first squads through the gaps died in a crossfire that turned them into meat and fragments of ceramite. Those behind walked over them. The last of the 42nd fought as the 7th always had. They fired until their bolters clicked empty, then drew blades. They fought shoulder to shoulder, their formation shrinking, as men fell, but never breaking. They died in ones and twos, dragged down under the weight of blows, smashed by hammer fists, riddled with rounds. They took a toll that would have shamed a lesser legion, but numbers and gravity and the simple fact of exhaustion told in the end. Cassander killed his last enemy with his bare hands. His chainsword had broken some time before, teeth snapping under the strain of carving through Iron Warrior's plate. His bolter was an empty weight on his mag clamp. An auxiliary lunged at him in the cramped crush of the vault, and he caught the man by the throat, fingers closing, bones crunching. A bolt round took him in the side of the helm. The world flipped sideways. He hit the floor hard, armor ringing. Boots thundered past him. A weight pressed down on his chest, then lifted as someone stepped on him and moved on. His vision flickered. Static crawled across his lenses. He saw Locrist fall, a chainsword buried to the hilt in his chest. He saw Castor slam his shoulder into an Iron Warrior, knocking the traitor back into the path of a Mauler cannon burst that tore both apart. He saw the yellow of his brother's armor vanish under a tide of iron. He tried to rise and found he could not. The last thing Cassander felt was the citadel shudder one final time under him, like a dying beast finally sinking to its knees. Then his heart stopped. Elsewhere in the fortress, the slaughter of those who could not fight was quieter, but no less thorough. 13,000 souls had been granted entry to the citadel's inner spaces at the beginning of the siege. Manufacturing crews, hab workers, clerks, guardsmen, their families, militia units, forge serfs. They had filled galleries and shrines and storage halls, clustered in makeshift camps, their lives reduced to the space claimed on a patch of stone. When the Iron Warriors reached them, there was no parley. Toromino's auxiliary cohorts moved through the civilian holding areas with files drawn up and orders set. The population was herded into lines, driven from their corners and alcoves by shouted commands and the crack of lasfire over their heads. Those who balked were clubbed or shot where they stood. Those who tried to hide were dragged out and thrown into the stream. It was not rage that drove the killing. It was procedure. In some sections, whole groups were marched into chambers that had once served as assembly halls and lined up against the walls. Firing squads did their work with mechanical efficiency, stepping down the line, shots muffled by the enclosed space. Bodies fell, were dragged aside, stacked. New groups were brought in to stand in the space made. In others, the population was simply left where they were when the Iron Warriors moved through. Any who approached were cut down. Any who cried out were silenced. There were no negotiations, no appeals to loyalty or compliance. The 4th Legion had not come here to win hearts. It had come to empty a fortress and erase a symbol. Some were deemed worth the trouble of chains. Strong backs, useful hands, those with skills in mining, forging, maintaining engines. They were shackled and marched out under guard, their eyes hollow, their minds already halfway broken by months of siege and days of slaughter. They would serve in the forges of the Iron Warriors, or in the dark holds of their ships, until they died. The rest were left as so much waste. In the end, it took surprisingly little time. Killing had a tempo. When practiced by professionals, it became a kind of production process. Corridors cleared, halls emptied, doors sealed behind squads once they had finished in a section, markers scratched onto the stone to show that this area was done, that no living thing remained within. The bodies remained. They lay in heaps and rows and scattered tangles. Men who had tried to shield others lay sprawled over those they had failed to protect. Children who had not understood any of it stared at the ceiling with empty eyes. Old men slumped against walls as if dozing. All differences erased by the same stillness, the same smell of cooling meat and spilled blood. The fortress that had once sheltered them now entombed them. Outside, Hydra Cordatus changed forever. The valley that had been green once was now a wasteland of churned mud, shattered rock and metal wreckage. The rivers that had run bright under the sun were gone, their beds cracked and dry where magma bombs had boiled them away and left only glass and ash. The agri-belts that had fed the forges and the cities were scorched black, soil fused into lifeless crust. Trench lines etched the land in dark lines, now half filled with water tainted by the runoff of rot and propellant. In some, corpses floated, bumping gently against each other when the wind stirred the foul liquid. In others, the dead had been buried under layers of earth and stone, compacted by the passage of boots and tracks into the foundations of new fortifications. This was the moment Hydra Cordatus stopped being merely a harsh forge world and began its decline into something bleaker. The wounds carved into its skin by the siege would never entirely heal. The ash in its air and the bones in its soil would form part of every harvest, every ingot poured, every barrel of promethium refined from now until the end of its usefulness. In the shadow of the dying citadel, Harkor came to claim his reward. His armor was still cracked from the climb. Dust and dried gore were welded into its joints. He bore no weapon. That had been requested of him before he entered the Primarch's presence. He walked with the stiff pride of a man who believes that though his plan had gone awry, his courage would carry weight. He knelt. "Lord," he said, bowing his head. "Scrapper of the 23rd Grand Battalion reports. We reached the wall. We opened a path. My men stood on the parapets while the fortress still lived. I ask only that you acknowledge that deed." Perturabo sat in his iron throne, Forgebreaker resting across his knees. The iron circle stood around him, silent statues of brass and steel. Barban Falk and Foryx watched from the shadows, faces expressionless. The Primarch regarded Harkor for a long moment. "You disobeyed," he said at last. Harkor's jaw tightened. "I acted," he said. "I seized an opening. The northern face was weak. The enemy thought it safe. I proved them wrong. We all serve your purpose, Lord, but some of us must move before the numbers finish adding themselves." "You caused an avalanche," Perturabo said. "You destroyed months of careful work on the northern approaches. You buried thousands of your own soldiers. You forced me to adjust my plans in haste to account for a battlefield you had deformed on a whim." He rose. He descended the steps from his throne until he stood directly before Harkor. The warsmith kept his head bowed, but his shoulders were square. "You got men onto the wall," Perturabo said. "You took a handful of steps in a direction I had already decided to move. You mistook that for insight. You mistook your impatience for initiative." His hand moved, fast as a striking piston. He seized Harkor's helm and tore it from his head. The mag clamps snapped, servos whining. Harkor's scarred face was revealed, eyes blinking in the sudden light. "Stand up," Perturabo said. Harkor obeyed. The Primarch circled him once, gaze traveling over every plate, every stripe, every gouge and trophy. "This armor," he said, and tapped a gauntlet plate with one finger. "You think it marks you as a warsmith, as a wielder of others. You have begun to bleed your own colors onto it, your own story. You have forgotten that you are not a story. You are a component." He gestured. The Iron Circle stepped forward. In their massive hands, Harkor's warplate was nothing special. They began to remove it piece by piece. They did not do it gently. They ripped pauldrons off with such force that flesh came with them, leaving bloody smears on the underside of the plates. They tore greaves away, leaving Harkor's legs bare to the cold air, muscles marked by old scars and fresh bruises. They pulled his breastplate loose, cabling snapping, connectors tearing from his flesh, blood running down his torso. Harkor did not scream. His teeth clenched, sweat beaded on his brow. He swayed on his feet as each familiar weight left him. In minutes, he stood stripped to his underarmor and then to bare skin, armor stacked on the floor in a heap like shed skin. Perturabo looked at him, a naked, bleeding figure in the center of a circle of iron. "Rust," the Primarch said. "That is what you are, flaking from a tool that has forgotten its purpose." He turned to a nearby officer, a line captain whose face was a hard, expressionless mask. "Assign this man to a line squad in the 23rd, Perturabo said. "No rank, no heraldry, no command. He will march and dig and bleed as they do. If, in time, I see something in him worth the metal he once wore, I may return a piece of it." Harkor's mouth opened. "Lord, be silent," Perturabo said. The word cracked like a whip. Harkor shut his mouth. Blood ran from the corners where his teeth had bitten into his own flesh. "Take him away," Perturabo said. They did. Later, when a broken figure in standard plate stood in the ranks of a line formation, unknown to most of the men around him, the word would circulate that this had once been a warsmith. That did not last long. Men died quickly in the trenches, and the memory of any single name dissolved in the tide. Not all were cast down. Kroger was dragged before the Primarch on a medical gurney improvised from a door torn from its hinges. His armor was wrecked, one arm little more than a mangled arrangement of splints and tourniquet lines. Bandages hid half his face. An apothecary stalked beside the bearers, ready to intervene if their charge died on the way, more out of professional pride than compassion. "Set him down," Perturabo said. They did. "Remove his helm," the Primarch added. The apothecary hesitated. "Lord, his injuries." "Remove it," Perturabo repeated. Gingerly, the apothecary unclipped the battered helm and lifted it away. Kroger's face was a ruin of bruises and dried blood. One eye had swollen shut. The other glared up at his gene-sire with a ferocity that pain had not dimmed. His jaw was clenched as if he were daring his own bones to fail. Perturabo crouched, bringing his gaze level with his son's. "You climbed," he said. "Yes," Kroger rasped. His voice was raw. It hurt to talk, but he talked anyway. "We climbed. We held. We did not fall. You did not break when the wall tried to shake you loose," Perturabo said. "You did not die when lesser men slipped. You did not surrender your grip when your body began to come apart. You dragged yourself onto the parapet and you were still there when I arrived to finish what you had started." He reached out and very gently placed his metal hand on Kroger's chest. "You understand," he said. "You know that endurance is the only currency that matters, that those who cling on longest under pressure are the ones who deserve to shape the next blow." Kroger's good eye did not waver. "I will not let go, Lord," he said. Perturabo stood. "The 23rd Grand Battalion needs a commander," he said, loud enough for Falk and Foryx and the others gathered to hear. "Its former warsmith has flaked away. Rust had to be scraped off. Something stronger will take its place." He looked down at Kroger. "You will rise," he said. "You will heal. You will take command of the 23rd. You will rebuild it in your image. When I next require a hammer, I will expect that you and your men have become one. Kroger's hand twitched, as if reaching for a salute he could not quite manage. Yes, Lord, he whispered. Barbenfolk watched this with an expression that did not change. He came forward when Perturabo's gaze flicked his way, dropping to one knee more out of form than necessity. Barbenfolk, the Primarch said, you have served as Triarch effectively. You have maintained cohesion where others split. You have balanced the needs of Legion and Siege with less waste than your peers. Falk inclined his head. I have done my duty, he said. You will do more, Perturabo replied. From this point, you are not merely Triarch of this siege. You are Triarch of my campaigns in this theatre. You will oversee the occupation, the fortification, the reallocation of this world's assets. When Horus is done with his rebellion, when this civil war has burned itself low, you will have a project waiting. He gestured at the broken shape of the Cadmean citadel, visible through the rent in the command bunker's roof, its silhouette a jagged black against a sky still smeared with smoke. This thing, Perturabo said, this alien relic, this symbol of Dorn's pretensions, we have broken it. That is enough for now. But later, when the Eye of Terror has a different meaning and the galaxy has learned new words for ruin, I will want it rebuilt. Falk followed his gaze. He saw the fortress not as it was now, a shattered carcass, but as it could be. Reforged in iron and rockcrete and adamantium, rearmed with batteries whose designs he already half imagined, repurposed as a bastion not of the 7th but of the 4th. An iron warrior's holdfast, its walls calcified around an arsenal, its killing fields measured and remeasured to perfection. Yes, Lord, he said. I expect you to return here, Perturabo said. When time and circumstance permit, you will raise a new fortress from these bones. You will make this world ours in more than just name. Falk smiled then, a thin, crooked thing. I swear it, he said. When this war is over, when the legions have finished devouring each other, I will come back to Hydra Cordatus. I will build you a fortress that makes this ancient thing seem like a child's wall. See that you do, Perturabo said. In the grand calculus of the heresy, Hydra Cordatus was a single entry on a ledger that spanned the galaxy. Strategically, it was one forge world among many. Its forges would serve whoever held them. Its guns could be turned toward Horus's enemies, or his father's with equal effect. Other sieges raged whose names would be etched more deeply into the records. Other worlds burned whose deaths would cost more in raw tonnage of lives and material. But in the private rivalry between two brothers, this mountain mattered. Rogel Dorn had chosen the Cadmean citadel as a symbol of ordered governance, of imperial strength in the shadow of the eye. He had sent his sons to garrison it, to make it an outpost of his own will. Perturabo had taken that symbol, broken it, and left its pieces on the floor. For the Lord of Iron, this was a proof, a solved equation. Stone could be made to fail. For the Praetorian of Terror, when word reached him through the cracked and bleeding arteries of the Imperium, it would be a knife. One more shard of betrayal driven deeper. One more reminder that there was no such thing as an unbreakable defense in this new age. Hydra Cordatus was only one scream in a chorus. Across the galaxy, other worlds were crushed under orbital fire. Other cities were gutted by gene-forged monsters. Other populations were culled, enslaved, or simply erased. Some died in hours, their names lost between the first shell and the last heartbeat. Others burned slowly, over years, their suffering stretched and thin. The skulls piled at the base of the Cadmean citadel's broken walls would, in time, be indistinguishable from those piled on 1,000 other worlds. The bones would bleach and crumble, ground into dust, mixed into mortar, reforged into steel. The screams would fade, leaving only echoes that few would care to trace. The legions moved on. On the valley floor, Falk stood with Kruger at his side and watched the smoke rise from the fortress. The air stank of propellant and blood and hot stone. The sun was a dull smudge behind the haze. The mountain's profile was different now. Its once proud crown shattered, one side slumping like the sheared edge of a broken tooth. "Ugly," Kroger said quietly, his voice muffled by bandages and the remnants of a reattached jaw. His new command markings were still wet on his patched armor. "Useful," Falk replied. "Ugly can be useful." They stood in silence for a while, watching Mechanicum construction engines already moving in to pick at the fallen stone, to salvage alien mineral and Imperial steel alike. Slaves were being marched up the newly carved access roads, chains rattling, overseers' whips already snapping. In orbit, above the ash and the ruin, the iron blood turned slowly. Void shields flared as the flagship adjusted position, engines rumbling. Other ships of the 4th Legion's fleet drifted nearby, their hulls bearing fresh scars and new kill markers, their holds full of plunder and prisoners and the lingering heat of discharged reactors. New orders crackled through the void. Another world, another siege, another equation to balance. Hydra Cordatus shrank in the Strategium's hololithic projection as Perturabo directed his fleet's attention elsewhere. The Cadmean citadel became a dim icon marked as taken, no longer a variable, but a known quantity. In the grand machinery of war, it was now a component, a cog to be slotted into whatever construction Falk would one day erect here. On the valley floor, Falk spoke without taking his eyes from the fortress. When centuries have turned, he said, more to himself than to Kroger. When the old names have become shadows, and the legions have become something less and something worse, I will come back here. Kroger glanced at him. "You think there will be anything left by then?" he asked. Falk's smile was thin. "There will be stone," he said. "There will be scars. There will be a memory in the rock of what we did today. We will take that memory and wrap new guns around it. We will pour new blood into these trenches. Hydra Cordatus will learn what it means to be ours." He imagined it. Iron warriors in colors deeper and more corrupted than anything they wore now. Sigils of powers not yet fully named burning on their plates. Siege engines whose patterns had not yet been drawn, rolling under a sky no longer merely dusty, but tainted by the very presence of the warp. Imperial fists would come again, called by the old rivalry and the new threat. Stone and iron would clash once, more over the bones already here. "The fortress will stand," Falk said softly, "and it will fall, again and again, until there is nothing left in this galaxy that remembers why men once thought walls could save them." Behind him, the sounds of labor and marching feet went on. Ahead, the mountains smoked. Above, the iron blood slowly turned its prow towards the next campaign, engines bright against the darkness.